Gary, I know you're a stud brown belt, competitor. I think I've been learning that you've moved to North Carolina. Is that right? You were in Ohio. So tell me, as far as, married kids, how long you've been trying, so I know a little bit more about you before, because Butch and I, we go way back. So I know a little bit more about you before I start, I start going on about me.
Okay. Born and raised Southeast Ohio in Athens County, Ohio University area. Lived there my whole life. Me and my wife met when she was a senior in high school. I was the year after I graduated high school. We've been together since 1999. Got married 5 years after that, had a couple kids. She got a really good job opportunity down here in North Carolina. So if I could find anything close to what I was making up home, it's well worth it. And now we've got suburban life. I've got a 16-year-old daughter who just who just got hired. So she's about to start her first job. My son is 8, and I've been doing jujitsu since 2012. And so I'm coming up on a decade of jujitsu now.
And what year did you start with Butch, and do your kids train?
So my daughter trained for about 6 months when she was 9, maybe something like that. It got to the point where the sparring got more aggressive and she was just out. She wasn't in it anymore. She had other things that she was interested in. My son's been training since he's 4. Nice. And so he really the rule is that the kids have to have extracurriculars.
Sure.
And jujitsu was the one that he was like, yeah, I'll just keep doing this. I've done my best not to push it. Sure. Because I don't want him to hate it. It's my thing and I love it. I think it's really important. But as far as him, he does it because I do it, and he has to have an extracurricular, and all of his friends do jujitsu. So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah,
so
it's good.
Our younger daughter started, so our older daughter's doing dance on Saturdays. And I told my wife, I said, I'm going to bring, I'll bring our little one to boxing just to see if she'll do it. And she sounded interested. So we got her gloves. So this was 19. So she was just a little older than 5. And I told the coaches, I said, because it's an hour class, I think an hour class on Saturdays. I said, I'd like her to do 15 minutes. If she'll do 30, great. I don't think she'll do the full hour. So what happened was they paired her up with a girl that's a couple years older, kind of the same age as her older sister. And they hit it off. And it became like, no pun intended, right? The hit it off thing. That's dad jokes, right? So, so they got along so well, and the hour flew by, and it wasn't just the pad work. It wasn't, the footwork on the tires and the conditioning. It was just something fun for them to do. Like they became friends, like your son did with his friends. And, that went on until February of 20, and then COVID hit. And then I got the girls to do some boxing in the basement, got some mitts and stuff, and they enjoyed it. The little one was a little more technical, obviously, because she'd done some training at our gym with our coaches. And as of late, our older daughter is interested in jujitsu, and some of her friends are also. So I'm hoping to get them started in a kids jujitsu program at our academy. I think you guys will agree that Brazilian jiu-jitsu is the best form of self-defense because it teaches us to fight from our backs. So, I have a niece who, before she went to WVU and she cheered 2 years there, I made her do the women's self-defense. I think they did 4 Sundays a month in August with Don Quinn and Andy Eisner and Jeb. That was a couple years ago before she went to school. So, I bet my life on the fact that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the most effective form of self-defense. And I think that it's important, especially for girls before they go off to school and things like that, that they do have some awareness of how to get out of the bottom position. So I'm glad that our older daughter is interested in Jiu-Jitsu. I'm not sure where that came from, but it's there. And then I've been working on her with mitts and some pads and stuff, and she hits very hard. So I'm shocked at how hard she is.
That is pretty hard.
Yeah, and we'll get her in the gym here, around all the kids' schedules and all that stuff at some point. So so back to the COVID thing. So
well, let's go. Let's do this real quick.
Sure.
Let's go ahead and start.
Yeah. Let me start it up online as well.
Sure.
That way we don't miss any. Like we can always go. Repeat everything. It's my fear. Look, I'm good one time. That's all I got. Just ask my wife. That's all I got. One time.
Butch, how young are you?
44.
All right, 48.
48.
How
Yeah,
you-
are you? So I'm feeling 44 this year. Terribly. I've gotten more injuries this year than the history of my life. It just seems like every other week I am hurt again. And be honest, I'm barely doing anything. But what I would, if I was going to try to analyze what I did do, is I quit working out like a year ago or
Sure.
so. Maybe that's got something to do with it, right? So I think maybe I was getting hurt less because I had like some armor built up, and I don't anymore, right? And I'm just guessing. It's weird, you know.
It's definitely possible. I always tell people that 44 is the year where I started feeling my injuries.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. 45 was the year I started fixing my injuries, like going to physical therapy and things like that. I think one of the things that I'm telling people now is that we need to teach our kids proper exercise technique at a young age. I grew up in Bridgeport. It's a football town, and everyone wanted to lift weights. So when I was 14, we got the sand weights,
Yeah.
JC Penney, right? You can buy 110 pounds sand weights for $50 or whatever. And, we started lifting, benching and squatting just until we could get up to 110. And we did, as many reps as we could, chest to bar, as bad as that is for your shoulders, right? As I've experienced in recent years. And no one told us otherwise. I think the kids need to get educated on proper exercise techniques at a younger age so that they're not 48 and, considering, shoulder surgery. For other people, it's happening at younger ages than it is for me. But I think that's, at least in our area, we're getting a lot of kids that are lifting heavyweights at a young age. So, in college, I never hit the 300 max, but, I was just under 300, like whatever, 285, like twice and stuff like that. And when do I need to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Gary, are we live right now? Do you need me to do some production?
We're live, and I think we can just go with what we had. Everybody, this is Don Cunanan. And Butch and me are here for episode 13, and Don's joining us from
I'm in Morgantown.
Ground Zero Morgantown.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Don.
Gary, thanks for having me. Butch, good to see you, man. I like the shirt.
Yeah, well, so for guys that don't know, or for anybody that doesn't know, this is Ground Zero shirt that we got. So Ground Zero did some tournaments up in Morgantown up at their facility there. So this is one of the best ones. That's back when Cody Tuttle was doing some foundation fight wear, right?
He was, and then he went on a roll as a purple belt and was killing it.
He was.
I mean, he's phenomenal purple belt competitor all over the country.
Which goes on to kind of why it's funny because Ashley Lockwood had a great podcast before yours, which
he sure did.
Yeah, so it's a tough one to follow, but that's also why. Listen, we would have had you on regardless. I got a text from my friend Justin, and he said, "Hey, are you guys interviewing all the gyms from West Virginia? Because if you are, that's awesome." And I was told Gary, I said, or I didn't tell Gary, but I said, "Not really. It's unintentional, but kind of yes." The cool thing is we have a great relationship with everybody. I don't know if other states are like this, but we're all friends. And it may not have always been that case. And I kind of brought that up with Ashley a little bit. I probably actually should have brought up more. And it was never a problem with me and Ashley, but I do remember like sometimes members of our gym parking in Huntington and then, people riding on their car, like, fuck you, fuck Heil's jiu-jitsu, stuff like that in Huntington. Like, so there was a little thing going on.
That's absolutely terrible and unacceptable,
Yeah, but I don't think it come from Ashley, and that's sure. One of the things I was saying back then, where I do wish we would have talked sooner, he and I, like, because we were always friends, but we probably could have squashed that stuff a little bit sooner with the members at our gyms, and maybe we didn't for a particular reason, because that rivalry was healthy in a weird way, because we were friends and it made us all better, and so I didn't mind it because I knew that I was friends with Ashley and Tim Dunlap and Jeremy Walter, there's a bunch of people.
Old school guys, man. But you're dating yourself, man. How old are you?
Yeah. Well,
44, right?
44, yeah.
Wow.
So like it didn't, people would ask me about it. And I used to tell them this exact phrase. I said, well, of course they think their gym's the best. That's why they're there.
For sure.
Also, what we think, like if we didn't think our gym's the best, then we're doing something wrong, and that's okay. And we have a good, healthy rivalry, but look, we're an hour away and we were, and you are 2.5, 3 hours away roughly. so it's not like, that's how I look at it. It's like, yeah, it's all friendly. Like if our members of our gyms go against each other, of course, both of us wants to win. And usually, you and I or Phil, and we'll be talking side to, right next to each other and coaching our people. Like we don't take it to heart. Like it's not like if they lost, it's not like you see in the Karate Kid, the series where they're really pissed, right? Like it's not like that. Like we're not, doing that. It's like it's a healthy thing. And besides that, I've been lucky enough to be, so a lot of your guys' promotions, you guys invited me to stuff, and I don't remember if I was at yours, but I feel like I was at Phil's. I don't know. I don't remember, but definitely at some, right? Do you remember?
Sure. Yeah, I know you were there for Phil's promotion. It was one of our April tournaments, and we had Randy Bloom come in. That was, so your promotion, I think, was March of 2009.
Yeah.
And then Phil's was April of 2009.
Perfect.
And then so Ryan Hall was there, Sonny Achille from Pittsburgh. So we had a few black belts there. And we had Randy Bloom. He had a beanie on, and he had a hoodie on, so he was kind of concealed. And we had all the black belts going on onto the mat. And then Phil's son came out onto the mat. With Randy, and Phil was confused. Then I think his son brought out his black belt, I believe.
He did. Now that you're saying all this stuff, it was
remember that. Yeah. So I mean, for the people from West Virginia who aren't familiar with the black belt lineages, the first two were Adderson and Walters. You mentioned Walters. I've not had the opportunity or the pleasure to train with Walters, but I hear that, like, for a large guy, he rolls like he's very small and technical. I've seen Adderson destroy people at the Bud Cup in Charlotte.
Adderson's amazing, is it?
Yeah, and he helped some of our guys down there. This is probably in 06 or 07. So they're the first two. I was the third in December of 08. You were the fourth in March, and then Phil was the fifth. And all of us were doing this. We're like, what about Ashley? Right? Like,
oh yeah, that's another good point. I wanted to bring that up because this is from me. This is not from Ashley. Obviously, he's not out here, but he got screwed. I'll be honest. He's one of the fathers of
100%.
And that's no disrespect to George Gurgel. I know he had a thing going on, and but I just remember because Ashley, and I meant to bring it up in the last podcast, Gary, just for reference, Ashley, even because he was trying to get his black belt, and I think at that time that's when George Gurgel was on Ultimate Fighter doing a bunch of stuff. He really had this MMA thing, like he wanted you to fight MMA, and Ashley even went out and fought MMA at least once, maybe twice. I felt only to get his black belt. Now it's like, it actually kind of hurt me in a way because I was like, I know he doesn't want to do this. And again, I'm talking for him. I could be completely speaking out of turn, but I was like, this poor guy, he should have his black belt over these other guys, right?
Yeah, for sure. He should have been the first black belt in West Virginia.
Yeah.
100%. And our understanding, so we didn't know about the MMA thing, or maybe we'd heard about that, but we knew that George wanted him to compete. And I didn't know if it was in BJJ or MMA, and everyone's lineage is different. Everyone's goal is different. Like you were talking about, being in Huntington and people's, saying stuff or writing stuff, and you were different than Ashley. You're different than me and Phil. Ashley's, his objective might be to make the best sport jiu-jitsu guys in West Virginia. Yours might be the best MMA jiu-jitsu guys, and ours might be, we call it parking lot tough. So as good as our white belts might be in sport jiu-jitsu, like we have an MMA, like a blue belt curriculum that entails some MMA. So what we always tell people is that, remember when Pat Miletich got bulldog choked by Carlos Newton?
Yes, absolutely.
And so we were like, hey, Pat Miletich could probably, drop me on my head in the parking lot, but our blue belts would never get bulldog choked ever. Like, so part of our curriculum is, you might be the best sport jiu-jitsu, but you can't not know Brazilian jiu-jitsu self-defense. And you coming from the Gracie Academy guys, I'm sure your self-defense is awesome. Ours is also, and that's because of John Oliveira and because of Phil Davis, because of, they were so tough on our guys learning self-defense, headlock escapes, bear hug escapes, all of this stuff. And maybe Ashley has the best sport jiu-jitsu guys. We really push, the self-defense, the parking lot toughness. So everyone is going to be different, and I'm not sure exactly what their focus is. I've been down there, wonderful guys. Our focus, we do have some good sport jiu-jitsu guys. We have some good MMA guys, but what we want to see is that our blue belts, are not going to get beat up in a parking lot, right?
Absolutely. We hope
State
not.
champion wrestler is not going to put him in a headlock and tap him in a cowboy. Never going to happen to our blue belts. Never, ever.
Well, I will mention this, Don. I don't know how often you've been at your gym lately, because I know for people that don't know, that you're super busy. You're a physician locally, and you also work in Clarksburg. I mean, that's 45 minutes away, but it's still like by the time you get off work, it's a 45-minute drive. But the summertime, so you guys are in a college town, WVU, obviously. So you get a lot of students. I'm sure that's up and down. That's probably somewhat annoying, but somewhat cool. But Lee Keaton's at our gym right now.
He's good.
Yeah, I'm sure he's back at school now, but I've known Lee forever. He's been competing. So, and he came in and like, he wears a white belt, and he is a white belt, I guess. But I was like, I just warned our guys, like, he's a lot better than whatever
Don't
he's
sleep
wearing.
on that guy, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. And they're like, you know how people are. They listen, but they listen, and then they roll with them. Like, I think a brown belt rolls, and they're like, dude, God, that guy's really good. He's not a white belt. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I told you. Like, I wasn't joking, and credit to Lee. And then for just so people know too, like that my guys don't suck. Lee also was in the West Virginia State tournament this way. Like, and he asked me specifically if he can compete as a blue or purple. And I said, well, here's the thing, Lee, like, I will let you do it, but you can't go in wearing your white belt, because the blue or purple belt has nothing to win, right?
Yeah.
It's not fair. So just
for the higher belt, yeah.
Yeah, so just pretend like you're that belt. Nobody knows you, and like we'll let it be. Well, he won all those divisions, just so you know.
Sure.
Yeah, and those guys are really good. So like, and I didn't say, oh, you just got tapped by a white belt. Like he was like really happy, of course. And I said, well, I knew that you were going to do very well because I've seen you roll with some people. So hopefully they put a different belt on you here pretty soon. So just throwing that out there for Lee.
We're looking to do some promotions in October, and it's funny because our guys, we have an affiliate in Fairmont, the Compound MMA with Fred Frederick, the U.S. Marshal. He and his wife have the academy with Mike down there. And then, of course, they're under Jeb. So he's a brown belt under Jeb. We have some brown belts there, purple belts. And then Jeb's, down the street in Bridgeport. So we encourage our guys, hey, if you're not doing open mat or training on Saturday, come up to Ground Zero in Morgantown. Other days, try to hit all the locations to get the different feels. And what we try, like Gary, you make your promotion decisions, right? Like Butch trusts you, like we all trust our black belts, even, Hastings up in Bullpen, Fridge up in Latrobe, Ground Zero, Pittsburgh. The higher promotions, they run by us. And, Don Quinn was like, he's like, hey man, and I can say, the guy's name's Vlad. So Vlad is a WVU student.
I know exactly who that is.
Yeah, if like, yes. So he's one of those guys where Quinn's gonna be like, hey, Butch, just so you know, this guy could compete in the blue belt division if you'll allow him, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Don's like, this is probably like in May. He's like, and Quinn he's hilarious, right? So Quinn's.
So also Quinn is listening to this right now. I see him on Instagram.
Oh, he is. Okay, so he's hilarious, and he doesn't give compliments out like liberally, but like, so if he says something good about somebody, like that guy's good. So he's like, so he's talking about Vlad. He's like, hey, you might want to consider putting a blue belt on that guy. I was like, I don't think we had a spring promotion, but we're looking to do something big in October. I was like, yeah, I said he's on that list, man. And I told Vlad too when I saw him at the gym on a Saturday, and I'm sorry because I think I saw him recently at one of the MMA shows, but when he cut his hair, I didn't recognize him, right? So so Vlad, if you're listening, we talked later, but when I first saw you, without the hair, I didn't know who you were, but So if Quinn says the guy needs the belt change, like that's a big deal, right?
It is a big, he's awesome too.
Yeah, he is awesome.
And just because we're talking to those guys, I don't want to sleep on those guys. Those guys are great. I want to say too, I appreciate, we have a mutual friend that trains there, John Shellhammer, and a couple of guys from Weird. And I just want to tell those guys, I really appreciate what they've done for John. John's a good friend of mine, and we have a lot of similarities. It's weird because, my real job, as you know, I'm a rep, right? It involves talking to people, and my gym job involves talking to people. So people that know me, they're like, they can't believe that I'm actually like an introvert, that I don't like to talk to people, right? Like, and my wife's family would know because I go to a lot of family events. I was just at this one this weekend, and they're always like complaining how quiet I am and how I don't, hang out with people. And I'm like, well, that's how I am for real. Like if somebody's not paying me to do something, I'm going to be really quiet and it's something different. But the reason I bring that up is because that's how John is. John's a really quiet guy. And really, it just means the world to him. He's a purple belt under you guys now, and it means the world to him. They also helped him with some other issues and does some great things. And I know they have a great facility there. And I just want to see it. It means a lot to me because I know him. I know obviously we're all friends, but
For sure.
I know him at a different level, and I just know it's just amazing what you guys have done for him. So thank you.
And I'm glad he's training, because I know he's been in Weirton, he's been in Charleston. So for a while he was off the radar, right? Like I'd see him in competitions and stuff. And the cool thing about him is like he's intense. Like when I'd see him at the state games, right? Like he's got the jump rope, he's doing his thing, listening to music. And I was like, this guy's like, it's like he's going into an MMA fight or something, right? Before he steps on the mat. And he attacks that, that jiu-jitsu competition with the same fierceness that he would like an MMA fight. And your guys are always welcome, when they're in town, when they're here for school, they're always welcome to come by. And your guys are awesome. We've had your guys when we were doing the submission only tournament, which, some of the things we've been thinking about during COVID are definitely, we want to bring that back. It's, as you know, like these tournaments are a lot of work. They are a lot of work. And, we think our guys will be on board with bringing it back because we couldn't do it without them, and we couldn't do it without your support as well. And yet your guys are awesome. If your guys weren't awesome, you wouldn't exist today. Like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the art where you can't hide your skill level. Little Johnny down the street that got his Taekwondo black belt in 18 months, that belt doesn't mean anything. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belt that, it took me, 11 and a half years. I don't think anyone's ever going to get on the mat with me and say that I'm not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Same with you guys. Like Butch, I'm not sure, if yours was 11 years also, or how long you're training.
Yeah, it was very similar, 97 to 2009. So whatever.
12 years. So, and the joke is always like, Gary, you go to like your Thanksgiving party and they're like, oh, Gary, how's jiu-jitsu going? I've been doing it for 10 years now. Oh, and what belt you? I'm a brown belt. Oh, well, your cousin Johnny here is a third degree super master in whatever.
You'll get there soon enough.
4 years, right?
Well, that's, I mean, when I started and you start talking about jujitsu, people are like, so you like do karate chops and stuff? Or it's like, no, it's not really that. Oh, well, what do you do? How do you say it? Jujitsu, whatever you're doing. And I always went back to just like, I always called it ground karate. Yeah. I was like, that's what we're doing. We're doing ground karate. Just to make it easier for people to understand. I have probably asked everyone I know to join jiu-jitsu at least 5 times each. And it got to the point by the time that I was a blue belt with other people outside of the gym, I stopped talking about jiu-jitsu because I felt like I was annoying people with it. and I don't know if you guys are that way, but it's all I think, like outside of family stuff, it's all I think about. I've got notebooks upon notebooks where I write down notes on videos that I watch. And I've got Butch will tell you that like, I'm kind of I'm the guy who's always got at the seminar, who's got my pen and paper and I'm trying to write stuff down and trying to make sure I catch every little detail. I'm not really obsessive about anything else in life, but it's the one thing that I like can't stop thinking about. Even techniques that I know, I rewrite those down and I'm doing jujitsu in my head. And I think for me, it's we were before we started everything, we were kind of talking about like mental health. Like it is the thing that calms me and it centers me a little bit. And if it wasn't for jiu-jitsu, I don't know what I would have to do that. Now I do it with music a little bit, but because I play guitar, but it's not as good as it should be. That's the guitar thing. I'm smiling because our girls started doing guitar. Our younger daughter started probably a month or so ago, and then the older one started the electric guitar. So we might be getting back to you about some tips on guitar playing for kids at some point. Don't ask me for tips. Ask somebody who knows. All right.
I will say that Gary, the surprise, I mean, I don't expect much from you, Gary. And I mean that nicest way. But no, but real, I was pleasantly surprised. I think, was it during the pandemic, you either played a song you posted on Facebook or something. We listened to it as a group because I think you were embarrassed, right? Obviously. And that was your biggest
it was right at the beginning of COVID. It was just like I was trying to because we didn't have jujitsu.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I was trying to find something to replace where jujitsu was. And we have Facebook, and everybody was doing these Facebook parties, and people were doing Facebook Live or Zoom things. And I was like, well, I am a people person, and we talked about, the introvert extrovert stuff. Like, I am an extrovert. I like to perform, and if it's not as a teacher in front of the class, and if it's not as the leader at work, then I need something to quell that, because I was like, all of that was pent up, and I think I started using that as an outlet in a way to like the Facebook thing. So yeah, playing online was like, this is a way I get that performance part out of me.
Yeah, and jujitsu's back, so I haven't heard one fucking song from you, Gary. It's been dead since jujitsu came back. But did you guys do something similar down? Because we shut down, and
Yes.
whenever that was, the governor made us shut down. And and I'm not gonna say that there weren't people, training in private.
Sure.
The gym was shut down, and at a certain point, we decided to start getting together on Zoom. I was like, look, we can't train, and we got together, and we just had we were basically drank, and then about 2-3 hours in, and it might be 15, 20 people,
Yeah.
about 2-3 hours in, guys were crying. It was very strange because it was a lot of stress to the pandemic, right? There was people being like,
It's a
by the
terrible
end
year
of the
for sure.
podcast, it wasn't a podcast. By the end of the Zoom meeting, which was just like a get together, people are like saying like, man, like to all of us, not just me, but they're like, you don't know how much you mean to me, and this is without you, like my life would, I mean, I was like, man, I didn't know how much we were all missing. You know what I mean? Like I knew like what I was missing. Gary knew what he was missing, but it was like it took a while for people to loosen up, right? It took a little liquid courage, but at the end, it was almost like I didn't know what to say to people. Like like we had our good friend Nate passed out. It was funny because he was like,
Is he
he
the one that had
literally
the really
passed
long
out.
hair before? Is that
Yeah,
Tesla? Yep, I remember him.
yeah, and then his brother got on. He's like, "I'm sorry, Nate is not doing well. We're gonna have to take him off this Zoom meeting or something." But he, it was like it was just people were missing. And like, and I've heard Rogan and them say about it, and it sounds kind of homosexual when they say it, and we know it's not. But that human touch, right? Like we don't think about it that way because we think of it as jujitsu, and it is. But essentially, we are. And even though we joke about it, the struggle cuddle, we're joking. It's a joke. But we do get that touch that we don't normally get. Everything's coming together. And by the time we're done with that physical, that contact, that competition, everything, and we've put our hearts on the line, and we've went 100%. And you and I are exhausted. Let's say that was the three of us went.
Bleeding, sweating, sometimes. Yep.
Yeah, and you're happy for each other. Like if you got tapped, you're pissed you lost, but you're like, man, what'd you do? And then the guy tells you, and then you try again, and if you stopped it, you're happy. And it's just a camaraderie that we are all missing, that it changed our lives. And we were also, quite frankly, at the beginning of that, we didn't know what was going on, right? I mean, we still don't know to a degree, but we didn't know, especially then, how long this pandemic was going to last. It was supposed to last 20 days. It was already deep into it, and it kept going. We didn't know if we were all going to die, and it was weird for all of us. And if anything, it solidified what jiu-jitsu meant to me, because I forgot too. Like I was coming in the gym too. Quite frankly, I'll be honest, I was packing in. I wasn't doing good teaching, right? I just, because I went through a lot of personal things too before the pandemic. Both my parents died. It was like one thing after another, and it was all compiling. And then it started, like the gym started feeling like a job. It was like I wanted to go home and just chill out because I had a lot of things going on, and I just wanted to maybe, like, I'm not real good at working through those things. Just like I said, I'm an introvert. So introverts like to hold that stuff. I don't like to talk to people. I like to hold that in and figure it out. And I couldn't because I had to go to the gym every day. And then, so I went to the gym, but I wasn't the best teacher, right? I said, okay, let's start class. Do your drills. All right, let's leave. So I wasn't really teaching anything, wasn't doing anything. And then anyway, then the pandemic hit. There's a lot going on in my mind, and when we were talking about mental health, that was my mental health thing. Like I wasn't doing well. And I didn't have that outlet, which the outlet was, I need jujitsu to get it all out of my mind. For that 2 hours, I just want to focus on me and this other guy. I want to survive. I don't want to think. It's a meditation for me. And I didn't have it. And neither did, anybody at the gym for that matter, right? So we all got on there. It was a crazy thing. But when I look back, it was a beautiful thing too, because I feel closer to my brothers at the gym, because it was a bonding moment where people, like, again, at the end, we're like, man, you mean, but like, I know what that means. Like, I'm making fun of it to be funny, but
Sure.
we said it all at the end. I was like, well, you mean the world to me. Without you, there's no me without you. You know what I mean? Like that's what it meant. Like, but anyway, yeah. So how did you guys handle all that? You know, plus you're working, and we talked about this before we got on. You're a physician too, and obviously you're not in the direct line of care, like an emergency room physician or whatever, but you're still there. You're still there. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, so we talked about, you know, it being a pretty terrible year last year. So so I work in primary care. I do primary care and wound care, and at some point there were four of us primary care doctors. So I actually was in the emergency room last year. So there were four of us who were.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Unfortunately, we were reassigned to the emergency room during COVID, and again, like what we think now is completely different than what we were thinking back then, right? Like go back to April of 2020, thinking of someone that has to go in the emergency room, you're like, that guy's dead. Like that's what we thought. Like,
and they were, quite frankly, right?
We were. So, you know, I had to make peace with like life, just thinking, you know, hey, you know, I'm probably going to be in the emergency room from April, maybe till the middle of June. So, you know, I mean, there were some of us that thought about maybe we're just done. You know, I'm just gonna back out, stop medicine. And then it came to the point where I said, you know what, maybe this is my purpose, just to go out fighting COVID. Because again, last year we thought COVID was going to kill everybody in this world. It just, when are you going to die is the question, right? I mean, are you guys going to die in 2 years, or we didn't know, but I considered quitting at that point, going into something else, you know. Leaving my place of employment. And then I thought, you know, if COVID is going to kill everybody in this world, I'm going to go out fighting for my family. You know, I'm going to, you know, fight, stop progression I can in this area. And, you know, it's not going to be like New York. You know, we're going to learn from them, and we're going to make it better here. The advantage that we have here is that we live in social distancing, right? So the state of West Virginia has less than 2 million people. The city of Manhattan has 6 million people, and they have 8 million people working there. So they have the entire state of West Virginia commuting in there to work there. So we have the advantage of social distancing. So I knew that, you know, although I was probably going to work there from April to the middle of June, we're going to get some knowledge from what's going on in those other places to make things better for us. But yes. Many of us thought that, you know, last year was our last year. So we had to make peace with things, good and bad. And
were you at the time that that's going on, were you talking to the guys at the gym, and what was, because like Butch had said, we had started, maybe it was probably a month and a half in, 2 months in before we started doing it, but then we started doing these Zoom casts where it was, you know, the Brady Bunch, and we were all on there drinking and whatnot. So I didn't know what was your connection to the gym at that point.
So at that point it was, you know, the governor said, you know, we're not going to have any training. I think, as Butch was saying, that there was some closed door stuff was happening. People, you know, would train in small groups or whatever. I'm not saying that it happened, but you know, we weren't taking any new students, right? But if people chose to train on their own, you know, we would do what our location would allow us, because we were located in a mall. So if the mall was open and people could get in, you know, there were times where people would, you know, train in their small pods or their groups. And then, you know, we looked at it and said, you know, how long can we sustain not taking members, right? And that was March. So, you know, we looked at it and we determined that, you know, we could probably survive till July before we start, you know, putting personal funds into the gym, which we haven't done in years. You know, before, on that note, you know, I have to thank Josh Fowler. He's one of our black belts that has been managing the gym for years. He goes above and beyond as far as keeping that place going. Eli Hawkins is one of the coaches that stepped up as well. Those guys really ran the show and have been running the show, especially as of late. You know, we couldn't do what we do without those guys. And as far as, you know, Butch, you're saying that it felt like, you know, you lost the joy in teaching. I got to that point, and part of that came from managing the gym. So, you know, as Ashley mentioned, you know, Ground Zero was started by Ashley Lockwood, John Oliverio, Neil Hurl, and Brian Dewsbury. So, you know, when Ashley finished school, he went to Huntington to start his law practice. John Oliverio went to Augusta. He started Ground Zero in Augusta. Neil and Brian were still with Ground Zero in some capacity. And then, that was 96. And then Phil Davis came on in 97. I came on in 97. And I think by 2001, sorry if I'm going into too much history, but I think by 2001, I think that's when, Neil and Brian left Ground Zero, and Phil and Matt Canning. Matt Canning is a former WV wrestler who's also there at Phil's promotion. I think.
Yeah, I remember Matt.
Yeah. And so he's in Virginia now, but those guys had run Ground Zero. I came back from medical school in the Philippines in 2003. And I think Matt had gone back to Virginia. So at some point, I think it was 2006, we decided, so we were part of a group called the West Virginia Martial Arts Association, which is a nonprofit group, which had Kung Fu, Aikido. I think it had a couple different arts, and then had Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think by 2006, we're like, you know what? We need more training time. We had guys, our original schedule was Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evenings, and then Saturdays. And, we had students, we had, non-students, but they're saying, we'd like to train Mondays and Wednesdays. Of course, Fridays they wanted to go out, right? So they said, we need to train. So, we broke off from the West Virginia Martial Arts Association, I believe it was in 2006, excuse me. And we did our own thing. And that's a big risk, so there are other people that are very comfortable, right? They're training with their groups, they all come together, they pay their rent and things like that. Like, we didn't know if we could do this. We thought we could, we believed in ourselves. And then we did that. So I think from 2006 to 2008, I think I managed Ground Zero. Then 2008 to 2010, I think Andrew Williams, who's one of our black belts, who's out in California now, managed, I think, and then Josh Fowler started managing, I think, in sometime between 10 and 12, I believe. My joy of training jiu-jitsu was lost when I started managing the gym, because it's different to hang out with your friends and to be cordial and to have fun, and then to ask them for money.
Asking for money is the worst. That's and it's the like when Ebba Bobcat, that's my thing. Like, yeah. I at very much displeasure of my wife.
Sure.
I don't ask for money, and the guys know. I was like, guys, that like, sure. I'm not gonna ask, but it costs money to keep the lights on. It costs money to keep the doors open. And all of my guys and all of the parents as well, they've all been really good about always paying and always being there for me. But it changes the dynamic, and obviously you and Butch understand even better than I do, but it changes the dynamic of, it's not just friends rolling now. It really is kind of a business thing, and these are clients. They're not. It's not that they're not your friends, because they are, but it changes the relationship.
They'll remain your friends, even if you ask them for money. So if you get comfortable doing that, it becomes less of you just have to do it. And, other places do the auto deduction. They have the programs where it just takes the money out, and then you eliminate that conversation, right? You have a conversation once and it's over. And the ones who duck, the ones who choose not to, are usually not the parents in the kids program, right? It's usually it's usually the adults, right? So so back to the joy in training. The good thing, Butch, is over the years, as we've done, we've trained a lot of good guys that can teach classes, right? So there was a point where I think from 15 to 17 where I didn't teach a single jiu-jitsu class. I taught the Muay Thai. I taught the Monday Muay Thai class, right? And I think I might have done either the Tuesday or Thursday. I might have filled in for the Muay Thai, but I would go there to train. But hey, if they need a hand or if something's going, like, I would be there. But yeah, I think there was a time where I was working for a local hospital, and I was able to start up the Monday Muay Thai program, and I would teach that. And then I would come in and I would train, either Tuesday or Thursday with Phil's class. And if they needed help, I would do that. And then you have to free yourself up and, work on the business instead of in the business, right? So, so you can promote your academy with some of your, purple belts and brown belts teaching classes while you're there to enjoy training. Gary, you're mentioning a couple. I wanted to get back to a couple things you mentioned. One was about, you go to seminars, you're pretty diligent about writing your notes and really detailed. One of the things that I will say is that when you're at a seminar, have one of your friends grab your phone, video yourself doing the move on another person. I mean, I'm not saying like video Gordon Ryan teaching a move, because that'll go bad, right? But right. So, but don't record the guy teaching the move, but record yourself doing the move. Because man, we have a guy, Clint Heinrich, like Clint, he will write like volumes and volumes of notes like you do. I told him, I said, Clint, I said, instead of doing that, why don't you just video yourself? And people forgot that, they kept thinking that if they video at the seminar, they're going to have to video the person giving the seminar, but video yourself doing the moves, right? I wanted to get back to your ground karate. So that was a term that we say that, Gzfs Smith, one of Ryan Hall's black belts, right? So he runs Upstream Jiu-Jitsu in Richmond. You'll see some of my throwback stuff where I hashtag ground karate and I'll hashtag Gzf. I encourage you, man, on your social media, go to hashtag ground karate, tag Upstream Jiu-Jitsu and Gzfs Smith. I think he'll get a kick out of it, because that's really what we're doing, right? When we're doing BJJ, because people see the gis and they don't get it. They're like the whole karate chopping thing, and it's ground karate, right? I haven't been able to listen to all of your shows, and I will definitely get to them. But for the guys who don't know, I wanted to give some props to Butch. Like, we are fans of yours here in North Central West Virginia, right? As an innovator in the state. You brought the state games here. I think Ashley gave you props for that last time, and I want to tell you we appreciate that as well. We're going to try to get some more people, after all this COVID. So next year we're gonna come in force. We appreciate that you've become part of, like the state government with that, right? Because you are the official state games. You helped legalize MMA in the state of West Virginia. Like, you were rubbing elbows with Dana White, right? I think my friend Sam Minardi was working, lobbying with you, and he's a Clarksburg guy I went to school with.
You're friends with Sam? That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So he went to, he was a year ahead of me. So he actually was in class with my older brother in Catholic school when we were growing up. So, I saw you guys were working together. I remember, a few of us were writing letters to help, push for MMA legalization. But for the newbies in the state of West Virginia, like, they see you as, the tournament guy, the guy with the big school in Charleston, but they probably don't realize all the stuff that you've done. So, if the guys are new to that, I want them to know that, we wouldn't have MMA in West Virginia without you. And, our guys, thank you for that. And now I would call you like the big martial arts innovator in West Virginia, because now you've got the podcast. I'm not sure who else is doing podcasts in West Virginia as far as martial arts goes, but man, Butch, like, you're like a couple steps to everybody else. And, and we appreciate all that you've done, all the guys up here in North Central West Virginia. So I made a couple notes. So I didn't want to forget that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. But I want to, before you go to your notes though, but I do want to say, like, it is awesome that all that happened, but what is cool, and it's funny because when I look back at our podcast, and I remember when Gary and Ashley were like, well, I think one of my questions were, what are you most proud of, right? And then they kicked it back on me, and these are some of the things I could have mentioned, but I didn't on purpose, right? And the reason is because I don't really want to, I don't want to blow that stuff out of proportion where it looks like, hey, I did this and I want credit for it. But that stuff happened, which is good. And I was in the right place at the right time. I happened to be in Charleston where they make the laws, right? So it is good, right? There is some good luck involved in that. And of course, you just mentioned Sam Minardi he's a lobbyist, which is, this is where you're doing the lobbying, right? And so the UFC put he and I in contact. There's a lot of things that helped me be in the position that I am in. But the reason I also didn't mention that stuff, which is cool, was because I did this all for everybody, right? And I don't want to take credit for things like.
I'm gonna stop you, Butch. Though I'm gonna stop you because and Hickson talked about luck. He doesn't believe in luck. I don't know if anybody. I know Butch listened to the Joe Rogan podcast. But Hickson talked about he doesn't believe in luck. I don't really believe in luck either. Actually, whenever somebody goes to compete, like one of my guys go compete, I never wish them good luck. I wish them good skill. If you're relying upon luck, then you haven't done the work. And if you haven't done the work, you probably shouldn't be there. So I wish you good skill. You've got all the skill. Now use the skill and hopefully you use it well. And I think it's the same thing. Like you could say that you were lucky that the opportunity hit at the right time. But I mean, truthfully, you did all the work to put yourself there for the opportunity. And so I think you're short selling yourself to say that you were lucky that the opportunity came. The opportunity wouldn't have been there for you had you not done the work.
And Butch also, there are other martial arts schools in Charleston that did not do what you did. So it's
Yeah.
not just the fact that you were there, right? So
Well, I appreciate
two,
that.
two against
Also,
one, man, you lose.
without you guys laying the groundwork for all this stuff too, I wouldn't be in the position that I mean, like, so I guess I do appreciate that, but at the same time, that's why we're having these podcasts now, is without an Ashley Lockwood, a Phil Dunlop, a Don Cunanan, and on in West Virginia, I wouldn't have the opportunity to come on and do what I was able to do too. So that's why I didn't mention it, because I want to say, listen, man, and that's also why I want everybody to know the history. Here's the weird thing is, like, it's no, like, you and I and Gary for that matter, like, nobody gets on anymore and like, 'cause people join jiu-jitsu to join jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
For example, like, and this is why I'm bringing this up. I get questions all the time. They're like, "Hey, are you guys like a real MMA school, or like, do you guys?" They ask me weird questions about jiu-jitsu, and I just want to be like, almost kind of an asshole, and say, like, "Are you serious? Like, do you not know? Like this, like, MMA?
Are you real?
You know, like,
real?
it's, but what makes me not is, first of all, that is an asshole thing. The other thing is, like people, of course, they're not going to know the things that we did. Like, it would be the same thing as, like, somebody came to you and like, or like, Don, you're a black belt? That's cool. Like, I didn't know. And that would be like, you'd be like, well, yeah, motherfucker, I started this shit. Like, I'm one of the tough, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to do that, but it is weird in a weird way, because and I guess that's how other people feel, right? Is that, it's always, what have you done lately, right? Nobody remembers UFC
Yes.
1.
Memory is very,
Gracie.
everyone has short-term memory.
Yeah, it's UFC now, right?
I mean, that's really become human nature, right? Like, you're only as good as your last accomplishment, right? So people people might be like, man, why don't you compete? You know, you roll well, and you're like, I'm like, man, my competition days are over, right? Like, I would love to compete, and I thought I could do it last year. I don't know if I'll compete next year. I think I will. But I did the Bud Cup. I did, a bunch of Nagas and stuff like that. I mean, my proudest accomplishments competition-wise were never IBJJF.
No
but
such thing.
What's that?
There's no such thing. Like, people don't understand. Like, there was no Naga or none of that
Yeah.
stuff when you were coming up.
Yeah, but so I mean, I think so. When I was a brown belt, gosh, so I was a blue belt for 5.5 years, right? And people are always like, now, like, think there's no way I'd wait for 5.5 years. Like,
Normal.
I'd rather be the best blue belt in the world than the worst purple belt in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was a purple belt, every purple belt I rolled with, so I was only a purple belt for 2 years. Every purple belt I rolled with within those 2 years, I tapped every single one of them. I might have been tapped by one or two, but I got them back. Whether that's, I was visiting academies and things like that. As far as competition goes, I did, oh gosh, Mike Moses had a tournament, mission submission. I did some Nagas and some things like that. But I did get to compete when I was a brown belt against a couple guys that did the Nogi Pan Am. So they were IBJJF guys. And within my age division, within my weight class, like, that year I tapped the silver medalist, Pan Am Nogi guy, and then the bronze medalist. So I never got to go against the guy that won the gold that year. But in competitions, that year I tapped both of those guys, but it was not at the Nogi Pan Ams. Again, like, I don't think anyone's ever going to get on the mat with me and be like, yeah, that guy's not a BJJ black belt. Like, that's never going to happen. Am I Gordon Ryan? No, I'm not that guy. But it's different times, are for different things in your life, right? So this isn't really my time to compete, although I'd like to compete again. This is my time, I think, to help bring jiu-jitsu to everybody in Morgantown. People will talk about, you might have a proudest accomplishment. People say, what are you most proud of? What are you most proud of? And we're proud of everybody at our academy, right? From white belts to black belts. Who are you most proud of as someone you've seen grow up? And we always go back to, there's always going to be a couple people, but you remember, and there's always going to be a couple people we remember. And the ones that you've taken from white belt to black belt, you're never going to forget those guys, right? And but you know Jeb, right? And people know I brag about Jeb nonstop. Um, we saw him come into WVU, as a 19-year-old, lanky, high school basketball-ish player, and fall in love with jujitsu. We saw him develop from, braboing and darsing people like before people were braboing and darsing people, right? As a brown belt, and when he was a white belt, he braboed me once. Like that was, I didn't get braboed by someone a lower belt until, I don't know, 10 years later when Jermaine caught me in a darce. But we saw Jeb evolve and grow, not just as a jiu-jitsu guy, but he went from college student, then he finished WVU, and then he went into the, I think, Clarksburg Police, then Lewis County Police. He's at the State Police Academy now. Oh, sorry. Then so he's a state trooper, and he's teaching at the academy. So he's in Charleston 5 days a week, right? So and then he started the school in Bridgeport in 2010. He has the largest kids Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program in the state of West Virginia. Like he has the most kids members, right, in the state. So we're going to see the impact of what we do in the people we train on a daily basis in our academy, and also in the people we have trained that have gone on to open their own schools. And this isn't to say that we're most proud of Jeff, but if we have to talk about people, he is the example, right? Like and you have your, I'm sure you've got Gary's down in North Carolina, like, and there's other people, and like I said, Josh has done a wonderful job. Josh and Eli have done so much during COVID. And then you've got the savant. I was talking about Sampi, right? Like, when people think other than jiu-jitsu school owners, like you, like me, like, Hastings up in, like we've got, Cameron, you've got Cameron down in Huntington. We've got Sampi, Hastings has, Bevan and Baker. Like we've got there are certain guys that are just killers on the mat, right?
Don't forget, this is another favorite of mine, which
Sure.
I want to mention why some of your guys are my favorite too, is because they're not just good jiu-jitsu people. They're just beautiful people. And I know that sounds terrible, like not terrible, but it sounds weird. But honest, I swear to God, like Miguel Lopez, right?
Oh my, yeah, Manuel, he's in Huntington now.
Manuel,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's
I don't
okay.
even know why I said that, because he's one of my favorite people. Him and he was actually texting me the other day, and Manuel and Sampi and Jeb are some of my favorite people, just because they're in, and this is what, like, because they'll have, my wife does a lot of the registration at these tournaments, right? So she has contact with everybody. A lot of people she forgets, but she'll come to me, and she came to me almost every tournament, and she said, she'd be like, I really like the Ground Zero Morgantown, because like, like all the time she'd say, I talked to Manuel the whole time, I talked to Sampi the whole time, I talked to Don or Don's wife or Phil, and like on and on, like every tournament it'd be another Ground Zero Morgantown guy, and I was like, well, Lisa, I like them too. Like it's almost like we were arguing over, I was like, well, I like them more. It's like there's always something, and I think that's important, because that's the things that you can be most proud of. Like those are awesome people,
Yeah.
and we all agree, but they're also great humans, and that's kind of what we talked the last podcast a little bit is. It's important, like that the people that you're not putting, or that you're putting out, are not just great at jiu-jitsu. They're great humans, because it goes, no matter what, it goes from the top down. So Gary and I talk about this a lot, kinda, because we're also trying to be self-deprecating a lot too, right?
Yeah. If
And
you
so
can't laugh at yourself, man, if you can't laugh at yourself.
Yeah, but you
It's not
know,
even
like,
funny,
my
right?
guys at the gym are super nice because I'm a super nice guy. I mean, it sounds stupid, right?
Sure.
But it's true, because on the contrary, I knew gyms in West Virginia. I met them when I first moved here in 1997. I first moved to Charleston, so there was no gi jiu-jitsu. So I ended up kind of doing some Japanese jiu-jitsu, some guys, and
Ernie Boggs and those guys,
well,
the brothers.
that's gonna force me to change the story a little bit. I was not gonna mention who these people were, but anyway, the point. The
I
point
just remember
was,
them because of the stick fighting. Boggs, Casillo, like, sorry. Oh,
no, it's fine. The point was, yeah, they were some of them, and yes, and that definitely was some of them, but without naming names, which Don already did. But
I apologize.
no, it's perfectly fine. Because the reason I say this, look, I take great pride in. A lot of us were all assholes when we were younger, and he may have been too, right? But so as we get older, I don't want to talk but I will tell you that, like, I do when I moved here, those guys were exactly like the bad Karate Kid, and I don't listen.
I
I
got
don't.
you.
It's my opinion. You
Sure.
know, like, and they may be super nice people now, but I just know that when I would talk to them, or listen, you could be you could be at a WVU game for God's sakes and be talking about jujitsu, and one of those guys would stand up and say, "You think you know about fighting? I know about fucking fighting." They'd punch you in the face and they'd start a fight. Right? It's
Damn.
constantly, you know. And my point was, it
Yeah.
filters from the way down, from the
Sure.
top down.
Sure.
And so literally, like I'm in Charleston and I'm running into the bad Karate Kid people. You know what I mean? So I was started thinking that's how jujitsu was. That's how martial arts was. And so I might have found myself kind of portraying that a little bit because people are coming around me and saying, "Hey, so and so called you an asshole." So in turn, I'd say, "Well, they're an you know, fuck them.
Yeah.
I'll kill them." Right? And so then it constantly caused this drama that didn't need to be. Where now, like if somebody says it, just like the first thing I said, like if somebody came and they'd say, "Hey, well, Don said his gym's better than you," and I'd be like, "We should, because his gym is awesome, and that's what he should think. I should think my gym's awesome too. Like it's fine. That's fine." And maybe that's what they thought at the time, and maybe I took it too seriously. You know, again, without had you not mentioned the name, I would have some great stories. But it's no, I'm just kidding. It's perfectly fine. No, but you know, but also Gary, so you don't know. It's funny because a lot of times in West Virginia, like when I like I'll be getting my hair cut or something, and they'll be like, "Oh, you do jiu-jitsu? Do you know such and such?" And a lot of these are from the Japanese jiu-jitsu camp, and I'll be like, "Yeah, listen, we don't really do the same thing."
Yeah.
They'll be like, "Well, so and so is a 6-time world jiu-jitsu champion." I'm like, again, it's not the same thing. Like they're a jiu-jitsu champ in their world, but like in our world, it's a different thing. But
The sport, U.S. sport jujitsu. They used to
that's
go to Australia to
also
compete.
like kind of the complicated thing, right? Because they call themselves sports jiu-jitsu, and that's what we call our IBJJF is sports jiu-jitsu. It's like it's kind of intertwined. It's just different. Look, and here's the thing. Like, and again, I'm not bad mouthing that. Like, it's not. There's not a reason to. They do. It's literally karate with strike. It's no different for anybody that's an AKJU. It's exactly the same as AKJU, which is the American Karate Jiu-Jitsu Union by Don Manning. It's the same thing. They do what we call, what do they call that? It's not Niwaza, but it's randori, right? So they do jiu-jitsu with strikes. So if they go to the ground, they're only allowed on the ground for 30 seconds. It's not what we do. It's a different thing. It's literally the same thing as AKJU, but because of the terminology, everybody thinks it's what we do. And again, and that's what I try to tell people. I'm like, look, if I go into that sport, I would suck. I don't do that. I do what I do. If they come to ours, they're not what you think they are, because most of those guys that were black belts there are blue belts at our gym and have carried on and done well. And those guys have done well too. There's a lot of guys that were at that gym now that are jiu-jitsu black belts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu too. So again, I do not want to, it's Don's fault if it sounds like I'm talking trash. It's totally...
my bad. But what's funny is like we'll go to these events, whether it's an MMA show and stuff, and people will see like, you know, Ground Zero, and a lot of guys pop their chests out because they do tough man contests or they do whatever striking thing that's going on. And I started with karate, like when I was 7, like I've done stand-up martial arts for 41 years, like longer than I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? And I was talking about, you know, Muay Thai, like I still get in and hit some pads and stuff. I stopped hard sparring probably in 2011, you know, with the WV boxing guys and stuff. It's not for me anymore. But
yeah,
you know,
same.
Yeah, but and then Bush, you know, I know you did kickboxing, but like it's funny how some people might look at us like we just do jiu-jitsu. Like,
yeah,
I'm equally as comfortable kickboxing. So I'm not super comfortable boxing with somebody, but kickboxing, I'll spar with anybody.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's funny. Like probably 5-10 years ago, I posted a meme on Facebook. It was like the same thing all jiu-jitsu people post. The ground is my ocean, blah, 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 whatever it is.
Dark
right?
Something, yeah.
Yeah, and so all these stand-up people were like, I'm getting tired of this. Fuck, I'll knock your fucking ass out. You're just going on and on and on and saying like how all jiu-jitsu guys think. I was like, I don't think you understand what this says. Like the ground is our ocean. So if you came to the ground, you're going to get killed because you don't know the ground. I'm not saying you're not good, because it also said something positive about the stand-up. I don't remember the exact quote, but and then I also finished. I was like, you do know that I'm a Golden Gloves champion. I do stand-up. Like I'm not talking trash about stand-up people, just like you said. Like I was like, come on, guys. This is not 1993. We've solved this argument. It's over, which is another pet peeve of mine. Every time somebody brings that stuff up, I'm like, they solved this in 1993.
For
it's
sure.
not for us to have a conversation anymore. Like, let's move past that. You do karate. I do jiu-jitsu. I can still love you. You can still love me. we don't have if that's what like you're gonna live and die in karate, I'm gonna live and die in jiu-jitsu, we're not gonna see eye to eye. It doesn't mean that we can't be friends. We don't have to be Republicans and Democrats. We can still be friends. Like we're in the martial arts community.
And that kind of, I mean, that's kind of the thing now, right? Is like it's interesting. Everything has become almost like a sport in the sense that like professional sports, you have your sports team and everybody wants to live and die by whatever symbol is their symbol. Sure. You're a Cowboys fan. I'm a 49ers fan. I hate Cowboys. I don't want anything to do with the Cowboys. And all of the Cowboys fans hate the 49ers. But that's everything in life now. Yeah. And it's an interesting time that there is no, you can't have rational conversations about anything without people being divided. And yeah. And on top of that, it's not just that you're divided on opinion, but you can't talk respectively about it. And we kind of beforehand, we had kind of talked about maskers versus non-maskers. And this is not to get political or anything like that, but you can't talk about what end of the toilet paper goes over or behind without
overhand, right? It's got to be overhand. Yeah. How about you? But people, overhand also?
It's got to be.
I saw the meme, the party in the front, whatever in the back. I don't know. Look, I am the mercy of my wife because I'm too lazy to put new toilet paper on the roll.
So
it's sitting on the edge of the sink.
There you go. So I'll settle it for you guys. So when the kids are still little, right? If they have to reach for it, if it's underhand, they might fall off the toilet because you have to reach a little farther. So if it's overhand, it's easier to get for the little kids. So if you have little kids in the house, problem solved.
Very
it's got to be overhand. So I wanted to get back to a couple before I forget. So I was bragging about Jeb earlier and about the kids program. And so before I forgot. So the kids program, Jeb won't even take credit for it in Bridgeport. That is, Andy Eisner. Andy Eisner, 100% hit purple belt under Jeb, and then Don Quinn has been running the adults program. So I apologize for not giving those guys props, and those guys will probably both tap me in ridiculous ways. Andy will probably give me a head and arm. Don Quinn will take my back and choke. So I'll probably get tapped for not saying that early enough. But Jeb doesn't take credit for the Ground Zero Bridgeport stuff. So he gives props to Andy Eisner and to Don Quinn, as I will as well. And what were we talking about? So I want to ask you, so we wrote down a couple things I wanted to ask you about Butch. Whatever happened to that kid at the Vanderlei seminar, the 16-year-old kid, 15 or 16-year-old kid that thought it'd be a really brilliant idea to hit Vanderlei Silva with a spinning back kick in the stomach. What happened to that kid?
So yeah, this will be a good story to talk about for guys that don't know. And
oh gosh.
It's funny. What's sad too? That I will say this. I'm pretty sure that somebody uploaded that video onto my account, which is fine. That means I gave somebody my account number, and I deleted that video. And the only reason I know that now is because Stefan Bonner the other day was like, "Hey man, whatever happened to that video? I wanted to show somebody." And I'm like, "Well, I assume it's still up, And he went looking for it, couldn't find it. It's still out there on the internet web because he did find it somewhere else, but it's not the original video. But anyway, that kid, he didn't. I won't mention his name. He didn't come to our gym. He was in that crowd that we just mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Sports jiu-jitsu crowd, the other sports jiu-jitsu crowd. So here's the story, and that's a good story because Gary, do you know any of this when Vanderlei came in by chance or no?
So that was a little bit before me, and I don't really remember any of it. I remember you've talked about it a couple times, but I never heard the full story, so no.
Okay, well, just so you know, in Inmate, there used to be a show on HDNet called The Voice with Mike Chavallo. It was international news.
And that's honestly, that's where I originally heard about it, but I didn't catch the whole thing because that was the same time that Boss Rutan was doing the him and the one guy. It was about the same time they were doing the MMA Tonight or whatever it was.
Mauro Ranello, the Canadian guy, the Boss.
Yeah.
Exactly, and we were on that show too, and actually they covered those events, and it was good. But yeah, so we had Vanderlei in. It was a big deal. I mean, the whole thing was crazy because I had the opportunity. I had some mutual connections, and I think Vanderlei's manager was like, "Hey, would you like to have him in for a seminar?" Of course, sure. Depending on the price. The price was pretty high back in the day, and I took a shot. And Don will take because Don was there. It was
was a wonderful like showing of support for MMA. Like you didn't realize how many people loved MMA until you came to that seminar.
And specifically Vanderlei, because I've had a lot of famous people in the gym trying to replicate that, to be honest, because it was such a great event. There was 200 plus people at that seminar. I didn't cap it because I didn't know. Most people signed up that day. You know what I mean? Like, it was weird. I didn't know how many people were going to come. They didn't know how many people.
I hope they all signed waivers, Butch.
They did. Yeah, it was funny because I know Vanderlei's manager went upstairs first. I had not even been upstairs. I was still downstairs, talking, probably with Vanderlei. We're like walking around the gym and doing stuff. His manager came down and said, he was like, "Oh my God, have you been upstairs?" And I thought it was like, he was mad. Like it was shit because my upstairs, I don't go up there. I thought it was shit, I was like, "Man, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry." He's like, "There's so many people up there." It's like, I've never seen this many people. And I was like, "Oh, you're just kidding, because this is West Virginia." And that's what they said later. He's like, "What?" I think because they're from California, obviously, in LA or Vegas. And they're like, I think people in Vegas and LA are used to seeing famous people, and you guys aren't, because if we did a seminar, nobody'd come because they could go anywhere. They could train with Randy Couture down the street. They could train. He's like, there's over 200 people up there. It's like a sea of people. And most of the people that we mentioned early, Sampy, all these people were there. It was beautiful. So anyway, yeah, fucking crowded, insane, right? Good seminar. I mean, if I'm going to be honest, the material was good, right? But there's so many people, he had to keep it somewhat basic, couldn't go too advanced. It was just too many people to figure out a good path, right? So he did a little bit of everything, still definitely good stuff. Then at the end, he decided like, hey, I'm going to spar with everybody. So Don was one of the people that he sparred with. I think I still have some video. And I remember too, because it was like, they sparred on the feet a good bit, but it was like super light contact, less than 50%, right? And then they hit the ground, and I remember the whole crowd went, "Oh yeah, ooh," like a big ooh, because there's two black belts going on the ground. And how good is Vanderlei, right? Like we know that he's Brazilian, and we know where he got his black belt, but is he really that good? Because here's Don Cunanan, like everybody's like, "Woo,"
Yeah. So Vanderlei, fights at 205, right? But like Vanderlei and Tito and those guys, they walk around like 230, 240.
Yeah.
And they're professional fighters, right? So like me, I'm a doctor. I've been training for fun. I was probably lifting some at that time. It's probably 10 years ago. And, he didn't roll like a 205er, man. Like it was,
wasn't he?
Yeah, it was definitely like rolling with the heavyweights. And, I did my best to contain him in my guard. And then when he passed, I did what I could to try to regard. And, he pitter patter, hammer fisted me a few times, which it got people excited. It was cool to see because Vanderlei smashes people, and and I think I threw up maybe an armbar or something. I threw up something, and then he passed, and then he let me go. But it wasn't fun like having someone that strong, like knowing what he could have done.
It was different, and this is what every time I've rolled with a professional fighter. And I think that we're all black belts. We are black belts, right? And we're pretty good. But those guys,
different level.
The moniker of professional fighter, like because when you threw up an armbar or a triangle, because I remember he postured,
he just walked through. Yeah, he just went right through, and I was like, that just doesn't happen. Like
not in our world.
My triangles are really fast, and I even rolled with Manuel a couple years ago in Huntington. He's like, man, I forgot about that. Like, I pride myself in my triangle, and like Vanderlei just like bam. I was like, that didn't just happen, and it did just happen.
That's what I'm saying. So, yeah. And that,
and it was fun getting to like being part of that. I didn't mean that it wasn't fun. I would do it again. It just, as a person who hates to lose, right? Like that wasn't fun for me. Like,
well, and I had a similar experience when I rolled with Rumble Johnson, where it was like, yeah. And so I had him in my guard, and I had done a little bit of an arm drag. And I had started, like I reached around and I was able to get to the lat. And I was like, I'm on my way to Rumble Johnson's back right now. Right? I'm on my way. And he just grabs my hand and he holds me there. And I was like, I can't move. He like my trail hand, as I was trying to reach and pull myself, my trail hand.
Yeah.
What's that?
You're a strong guy. It's the same scenario, right?
I bench, like at the time I was bench pressing 365. I'm in the 1,000-pound club at that point, over that probably, if you took my bench, my deadlift and my squat, I was probably somewhere close to 1,300 pounds if you added them up. I'm a strong guy. I'm not weak.
For sure.
And for him to hold me like a baby, like just like I couldn't do nothing. And it made me feel, and then on top of that, like he wasn't allowed to punch me.
Thank goodness.
Yes.
Goodness. You wouldn't be here, man. I've seen him hit people.
Yeah. And again, that was at our gym too. And it's very similar. Same, another professional athlete. It reminded us why they're professional athletes, because Rumble Johnson's not known for his ground game, right? Nobody would say, hey, man, that guy's a killer.
I think he's a JUCO national champ, right? Junior college, was he 2-time national champ?
Yes, but nobody's talking like he's Damian Maya on the ground, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I remember, you know, Gary, because Gary's students were there, and I remember they were excited, and, you know, just like if I was wrong with it. And then all the same thing, because I remember, you know, he's letting Mike Diaz take us back, and Mike's not terrible. He's a good solid blue belt, and he just laugh, and literally, I think he literally reached behind his head and just threw him on the ground and was just laughing. But also, can we also mention how fucking huge Rumble Johnson was there? It was like,
I can't believe that guy ever made 170 ever as an adult. That's crazy to think.
His arm was as big as our heads back then, you know.
It was nuts.
Wait, we're getting off. So tell me about Vanderlei and this guy.
Yeah, so yeah, to get back on.
So about that, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, so similar story. So we're just saying, you know, how great this guy is. So he's sparring with everybody and guys that were making everybody happy. And listen, that was also.
Oh, it was wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, that was also, let's be honest, that's when Vanderlei was coming off Pride in the height. He just got to UFC. He hadn't lost yet. He was still in the height of his game. So sparring with Vanderlei at the time was
like playing basketball with Michael Jordan, right? Like,
yeah, and he was going to go up until what happened. He was probably going to go with all 200.
For sure.
Yeah, he told me that so much in the car because he was pissed. So the story is, so people don't know, a 16-year-old goes with him finally. After a handful of guys went with him, 15, 20, even one of your kids, like a little 5-year-old.
Yeah, I think a little Ashton, man. That was a wonderful experience for him too.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how cool he was. He's going with kids and adults and black belts, everybody, right? And everybody's
he probably let Ashton tap him too. Like he probably let the little kid tap him.
And I think that video's got one of the highest views also on the internet. It's not on my YouTube, it's on somebody else's. But yeah, so it was a great experience. So anyway, the 16-year-old goes up, and same thing. But for people that don't know, like they're sparring with MMA gloves. Some people didn't even have gloves on because we weren't expecting to spar with Vanderlei. We just came to a seminar. So they start within the first, let's say 30 seconds, that kidney, I think he was 16 at the time, did a spinning back kick as probably as hard as he can, or at least looked 70+%. Sure. Pissed Vanderlei off, but he kind of shrugged it off. And I think, as we all know, what bothers people more is the crowd's reaction, because it was like when he when he took the spinning back fist or spinning back kick to the belly, everybody went, oh shit. So then he was probably a little amped up, but he controlled himself, and they kept playing around. Well, the kid's dad was like, "You got him, buddy, you got him." And again, you know, it's from the place that we were talking about earlier. They're a little bit crazy. So he did it again, and this time, as soon as he did it, Vanderlei unleashed like a. And
I don't think he hit him with the second. I think he tried, and Vanderlei might have clinched him or something, but he didn't land a second. He didn't land a second kick. I'm sure of that.
He came at him like Pride. It was 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 until he clinched up and got him in the everything, just like we watched in Pride for all those years. And everybody's like, "Oh shit!" And then Vanderlei did a couple of things. They went to the ground. And he started fucking decking him. It was ground and pound. Vanderlei came alive.
Yeah, that's the stuff I was worried about when I was on the bottom, right?
Yeah,
but I was worried about it. Thank goodness I didn't get that.
Even in the height of all of this, like the crowd's going crazy. We're all like excited, like, holy shit, this is happening. It really, when I watched the video, it really wasn't happening. Vanderlei did a good job controlling him. Sure. He was pissed, but he wasn't hitting the guy in the face. He was hitting him in the chest and the belly pretty hard. Yeah. He actually took some hard elbows. Boom. But they were landing in the sternum area. Not like when I was live, I was like, he's fucking killing this kid.
Yeah. I hope he signed a waiver, right? That's what I'm thinking. I hope he signed a waiver.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, and it's funny because later somebody posted this video to MMA.tv or the Underground.
I remember that. Yeah.
A lot of people were making comments. Whoever owns that gym, it's his fault, which is me, obviously. Of course, they weren't at the situation. It was in the height of it all, and then also like I think we were all in the same boat. Like you just fucking kicked Vanderlei. You should kicked. You need to learn to listen. Right. And we knew Vanderlei wasn't going to go full Vanderlei. And in the background, you could hear this guy's dad going, "You got him." Because also, so Vanderlei's throwing elbows to the chest. This guy's kidney kicking him like Hoist Gracie.
Yeah. I remember he put him in closed guard. Yep.
That was the other thing. So everybody was like, holy shit, this is a real fight. Like, what's going on here, right? And then, after Vanderlei lands these, like, where everybody's like, oh, like, it started getting loud, like it's a real UFC or a real Pride, right? Vanderlei just woke up and he landed the last elbow and then literally, I think, grabbed the guy by the hand and pulled him up.
I think, and then he smiled and
hugged him.
Yeah.
And it was over. So we kind of forgot about it. And then somebody posted the video before I even got downstairs. The video was already on. The video said, dumbass kid attacks Vanderlei Silva. So it already went viral by the time I got to the limo. Like, we had a limo waiting for me and Vanderlei. I get in the limo. Vanderlei's pissed. Like, he's not over it. I'm over it. I thought it was like it just happened, right? Vanderlei gets in the limo and he's like, is that your fucking kid? Who the fuck was that kid? I'm going to kill him. And I was like, dude, I don't know who that was. Like, this is a seminar for everybody. I don't know. And he's like, oh, fucking kill him. And then I was like, I typed something on the internet. I was like, here's the video. So me and him watched the video in the limo. And he was like, yeah, here's where I was about ready to kill him. And then I woke up and I stopped, and anyway, so it went, it was crazy. Even that whole night, like, I had to take Vanderlei and get him drunk. He was a little bit amped up.
Sure.
And I will also mention I don't know how Vanderlei is now, but that was in the height of, Vanderlei was like world renowned, dude. Taking him out was another level. There was girls everywhere. Like, I had to like I said, I had rented a limo. After that, we were going to Quaker Steak to sign autographs. And we did go to Quaker State and sign autographs, but
I think we were there eating wings with you. Yeah, we were all. I remember that afterwards too. Before we drove back, I think we went there too.
Yeah, and it was probably, I think they said 1,200 people there waiting to get autographs. It was funny because I sat at the table with him because I was I was running the event, so there was like probably 500 people that got my autograph that claimed they saw me fighting Pride. They're like, hey man, I saw you fighting Pride. You did great. Also, I don't know if they thought I was Sergey Carrot. That's the only thing I was like, who's the white guy that was in Pride? I have no earthly idea, So I was just like, well, thank you very much. So I was just like, I signed in autographs first and then, going on. And then we got in the limo and then we're going to another after party afterwards. There was a club called Impulse in Charleston, which was pretty cool. And we had a good time, but it literally, like, everybody that was in our limo, which was 12, 13 people, couldn't get in because so many groupies in the thing. It was women out the ass. And I was like, I got pissed at one point because I was like, hey, like, we drove these people, like, they don't have a ride. And Vanderlei's like, yeah, don't worry, like, it's fine. I was like, but it's not fine. Like, me and Vanderlei almost got in a fight because I was like, it's not fine. Like, those are my friends. They don't have a ride back. And he's like, ah, man, why you being a party pooper, man? Like, just relax, because he's like from Brazil. That's, how they all are. I was like, well, yeah, but those are my friends that have a ride, So I'm mad the whole time. We get in the car, and then these girls are bitching in the car that there's not enough beer. And I was like, well, first of all, this is not a party. We're going to another fucking event. And so I made the limo driver stop, like, somewhere mid, like, on the way to, and I said, I kicked about 6 girls out. Because I was being an asshole, to be honest with you.
You're lucky Vanderlei didn't throw down with you for doing that.
He was very angry because he's like, why are you being an asshole? And I was like, because they took my friend's ride and they're bitching. I don't have no liquor. I was like, this is bullshit. And so I literally threw them out in the road. Man, and there's a lot of stuff I can't say because I don't want Vanderlei to come back. Sure. There's so many, so much to that story. There was people in there that were like, I don't know.
So did this kid, so that was 10 years ago. Is this kid in the UFC now like you thought he'd be? I'm guessing he's not.
No, but I will tell you that, and this is why I'm being very somewhat careful with a lot of stuff. Yeah. I will tell you this, and it's very heartfelt. So his mom called me a lot afterwards, and she was mad about the video being posted because it said dumbass kid attacks Vanderlei.
And you didn't post it, so.
Yeah. I did, yeah. And so her and her husband, again, they grew up in this environment that I said earlier was not a great environment. These people are kind of weird, right? Yeah. It went from the top down. They were just kind of assholes, and they were part of it. So ultimately, I don't think it was their fault. Like, that's what their instructor was telling them to do. And you and I have been in this situation. For example, another. I don't want to make it a big story, but the first time I rolled with Hoist, the same thing happened. I thought when I invited Hoist to the gym, I was on Underground, MMA TV, and I was like, hey, I asked him, I said, hey, I'd love, you're the reason I'm in the sport. Would you be my trainer? He said, sure. So he came down. I'm thinking Hoist Gracie wants to see how tough I am. I'm thinking UFC, not thinking jiu-jitsu. I'm thinking UFC, right? So he and I roll I roll 1,000%, which again, I'm just a blue belt, but you know how spazzy white belts and blue belts are.
Sure.
And so like I get him in a guillotine, wrench his face, and by guillotine I don't mean I'm close. I just get it in a
On his
headlock,
face.
just
Yeah.
wrench it on him. I'm just being 240-pound ape shit retard, right? And so he gets mad and he pops my arm, he pops my jaw, he gets me in a couple chokes and won't let go of him.
Sure.
But I just roll over and I just get back up and I said, let's go again, because I'm trying to impress him. I think he
Yeah.
wants to see how tough I am.
Yeah.
So he beats every time. He significantly beats me up worse. The
Sure.
next time's even worse. And then he's even talking shit to me at this point. He's like, hey, Butch, you know what that is? And I'm like, no. He's like, that's called putting in another gear. I'm like, okay, well, all right, let's go again. Like I'm that naive. I'm like, let's fucking go.
Yeah.
By the time it's over, I mean, literally when I get in my car, my inside of my mouth is destroyed. My arms broke. My face is destroyed. And I wait for him, kind of almost in tears because I'm beat up so bad.
Yeah.
And then he berates me in the car. But that's when I learned, which this kid did not learn, right?
Sure.
He said, he was yelling at me. And I said, why are you yelling at me? I thought that's what you wanted. He said, what, why do you think I want that? And I said, what? Yeah, well, you're here to see if I can be your affiliate. And he's like, well, yeah, you give me $150, you can be my affiliate. You don't have to show me, he's like, you don't have to do nothing. He's like, if you beat me, it'll be all over the internet. I beat you, nobody fucking cares. Calm the fuck down. You test yourself against other white belts and blue belts, and I watch. You don't test yourself against me, I'll kill you. And instead of being upset, I was like, that's a valid point. Like, I'd really never thought about that. Yeah, he's like, yeah. And so from that day on, I learned something. I didn't know. It was ignorance. And ignorance is fine if you don't know. And I think that's where that kid was. It was ignorance. He was told something.
He was 16, right?
When he's also going with some guy that's probably telling him he's a 6-time world jiu-jitsu, he's this, he's that, he's this. And they think that guy is Vanderlei. Vanderlei is Vanderlei. That's Mike Tyson of boxing. That's, there's a difference between you and I sparring. Then I spar with Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's going to kill me. Sure. I better have myself in check. That's what that kid didn't know. Like, he probably sparred hard with his instructors and got away with it. You go with Mike Tyson or, whoever you want to mention, you better hold yourself in check. They're going to fucking kill you, right?
Yeah.
That's what we found out that day. And so that was the complicated thing. That kid's mom called me a lot, and I tried to explain to her, like, look, I don't have nothing to do with this backlash. I really didn't. I had nothing to do with it. I was like, and she'd be like, hey, can you just please tell them to take the video down? You can do this. And I was like, yeah, and then ultimately that's what happened. Like, eventually I figured out they literally did post that video on my thing.
Okay.
Which means I probably did give them the code. I 100% didn't know, because I went on and didn't know. And I was like, wait a minute, that actually is under my account. So I deleted the video. And I think back, because now I'm trying to grow my YouTube thing.
It'd be great to have that video, right?
Yeah, that would have been millions and millions of followers. I was like,
I really think, like, if that was a Saturday or so, like, by like Monday or Tuesday, you had like 10,000 views on YouTube. I remember looking at it.
It was ridiculous.
Whoever posted it.
It was like, yeah, it's
within like 2 days.
I have a chance of having a viral video, or even knowing what that means, because that literally is what that meant, right? Like,
you could do Vanderlei versus the Kid Part 2, man. Right?
I know. It's so funny, because now anything I would do would have to be like staging that, right? Like something that would be completely fake. We actually had that moment, which was amazing. And I was glad that you guys were there for it. Ashley brought it up at the last, a little bit, like a couple of his people are there. And there's one of the few pictures I have is actually me and Sampy stand next to each other with Vanderlei. Like, I don't have a lot of pictures from that seminar because it was so chaotic. It was just like bam, 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 bam. Like, we didn't expect. But listen, man, that was one of, and not just what I just mentioned, that was beautiful, but I'm telling you, every little bit afterwards was so fun. Like, the party afterwards, the crazy things that happened afterwards that I can't mention because a lot of people get in trouble. And most of those things, that's why a lot of times I have those fighters in, is for the other stuff, right? Like, we have the seminar, but that's why I end up being friends with everybody, is because it's the other stuff. Like, we go and we have fun, and then people are like, hey man, those guys are cool. Like, I love going to West Virginia. Like, who else would ever say that? But we have such a crazy time that,
So you've had lots of people, for us, it's mostly been jiu-jitsu guys, but you've had, jiu-jitsu, MMA guys. Like, if you had to bring somebody back, like, who was, of course, money, no object, like, the fun time, it doesn't even have to be like, hey, they taught the best techniques, but who did you have, like, really, really fun time with as far as hosting and got along well with your people and stuff?
Yeah, Vanderlei is my favorite for those stories,
Okay,
right? But Stefan Bonner and I became really, really good friends, right?
nice.
To this day, we hang out in Vegas. I have to go to Vegas for work every year. There's a big convention, so we hang out all the time. And I will tell you this: that I don't know if he's going to listen to this now, but he's going to do this podcast eventually too. But that guy is one of the coolest guys because it's essentially like he's working and I'm not paying him. He'll sit there all night and entertain all these other physicians. I'm a medical sales rep, right? So
Yeah.
my job, they have this physician pain doctors conference every year that I have to go to, and so all these doctors will be like, "Man, I want to meet Stefan Bonner. I heard he's your friend, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's invite him out to dinner." So one time we went out to Nobu, and he sat and told fight stories all night, talk about Anderson Silva, Forrest Griffin, and
Oh gosh.
Golden Gloves in Chicago, on and on and on. These guys would ask question over question after question, and it was beautiful. And what hurt me in a way, which again wasn't on purpose, is that it was almost like he was working, right? And I
Okay.
think he was having fun. I'm
Yeah.
hoping, but that wasn't the plan. Like I invited him out to hang out, and then it turned out that we had a bunch of fans, right?
Yeah.
And they sat and asked the dumbest questions all night,
Of
like.
course. Did it
But he
hurt when
entertained it.
Anderson Silva jabbed you or whatever?
Yeah, and he entertained it all night, and it was beautiful. And to this day, people talk about it like it was yesterday. Like what I
That's
mean?
awesome.
Like they're like, man, it was the greatest time. And I'll be out. And there was a time too that it actually got me in trouble, um, some work related stuff because he owned a strip club at that point. I shouldn't went. I went to visit him, but he just so happened to own a strip club, right? And so
Sure,
that's
sure.
like you don't want to take doctors there and stuff. But I don't want to get into that stuff. But it was just like like it had nothing to do with that. And I was trying to
Sure.
explain to people that too. They're like, I can't believe you guys you're at a work event and you're at a strip club. And I was like, but I wasn't though. Like people wanted to meet Stefan Bonner. It just so
Just so
happened.
happened that's where he was.
Yeah, and that's the true story. And I was trying to
Yeah.
explain this to people, and they're like, "Yeah, right." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to pretend he didn't own a strip. Like he did, but
Yeah.
I will guarantee you this, and this is the truth. There was 10 guys there, roughly. There's probably more than that, that did not one time. Well, that's probably a lie. I'm gonna say they didn't look at naked girls. They probably did, but they literally talked about him all night. That it was almost weird. Like what I mean, where I started feeling bad for him again because I'm like, this guy's working. He owns this place. He's got to get to work, and they're just fanboying all night.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I'll be forever grateful for that. Like, listen, and then like Gary mentioned that the Rumble John, he's still a friend. He's gonna come back here soon. Dan Severin, oddly enough, it's funny because I love Dan, and
Yeah.
all of us remember him from the old days. Nobody knows who he is anymore. I actually had to just talk to his. Because he has his manager work for him now, and every time he comes through town, his manager will like write me, "Hey, you want Dan to come down?" I'm like, "I do," because I like Dan, but nobody's gonna come.
Nobody knows who he is.
And they're like, and they don't understand. Like, they'll write me back with the entire resume, and I'm like, "Listen, that's not what I said. I know exactly who Dan Severin is. He's a legend. If without Dan Severin, there would be no us. He's a god." But everybody that just loves Conor McGregor does not who know Dan Severin is, and they don't really give a shit. I don't care what you tell me. The most I can charge is $25, and maybe 10 people will show up, right? And like, and that's not a knock on Dan Severin. It's just
No,
the
no.
tide is turned, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's what? I mean, how many years? 1995 when he fought in the UFC. I mean,
yeah,
that's kind of like people basketball. Like we know athletics. Like we know who Michael Jordan is, but if you ask some kid in high school who doesn't follow basketball, they know him as like the guy in the crying meme, right? Isn't that what Rogan talked? Like there was a meme with Jordan.
that's the
Like
meme,
they
yeah.
don't know who Michael Jordan is unless they currently play basketball, right?
Yeah. Well, so great time on me speaking, but here's one thing I wanted to say. And Gary,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're involved in this time. Were you a big user on MMA TV or NHBgear.com or any of those websites back in the day?
Bloody Elbow was one of them that I was
Yeah, that was
following,
one.
and then a little bit of the MMA TV. But see now, when all of that was going on, me and Brandy were broke as shit. We didn't have any money, and so we didn't have any internet. And because we didn't have any internet, I was like, all of that stuff was like few and far between. I remember early on. Now this is probably 90. Probably talking like 90, no, it's probably like 2000, the Super Brawl. And we've talked about this, but the Super Brawl videos, that all of that stuff was going on in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And
I had some fighters in that actually.
Right. And so the Super Brawl videos, whenever I couldn't go somewhere and watch a UFC fight, because once again, I had no money and we were just broke college kids trying to find our way. Um, I rolled pennies to like have enough cash to buy the 8 CD or 8 DVD set of Super Brawl videos that came from Hawaii. It was like $80 for 8 CDs or 8 DVDs or something like that. And so I rolled my pennies and I was like, babe, I've got enough money. Is it okay if I really want to get this? And so then, that's where like I found out about Jason Mayhem Miller and but like a lot of fighters that nobody knew about because I was entrenched in that and I was watching the HD TV and there for a while it was like Access or whatever it was, I think it was. But like whenever I could watch that stuff, I'd watch it. Anytime a new UFC came out, I would run to the video store, rent the video. That way I could watch it that night. And a lot of times it was like by that time Hoist was done fighting, but it was like the Tank Abbott days, and then Chuck and Tito had started like their thing, and I think Arlovsky was probably in there somewhere around that time, and so that's what I was watching. So as far as the other stuff, I was kind of like the internet stuff. I was dumb to because we just didn't have any money for internet.
Well, here's why I bring that up. So that's how we kept, and Don will remember this. This is kind of a good story to think about. But so the UFC was illegal during that point, right? Illegal in America, was not around. So the most of us guys that had a taste of the UFC in the early 90s that lost it, how we kept it alive was message boards on the internet. So there was, I was a member of something called the Combat List that Joe Silva, who had became a matchmaker, Josh Hedges, who became the photographer of the UFC, Dana White was also on there, who was nobody at the time. All these people are on there, and we were the group that was keeping MMA alive. For example, you could still watch it in Canada, and there's a thing going on for a while where somebody in Canada supposedly would buy every pay-per-view. Like, it could be you, Gary, and you know how pay-per-views replay, right? So there might be Saturday at 10 o'clock's a live one, and then there's one after, and then there's one Sunday, and then they keep going. So the deal was this guy's supposed to buy every pay-per-view. The theory was if we got the numbers up so high, America would have to put it back on TV, right? Like, so, and then of course we found out eventually that all these guys were being lazy and they just took everybody's money and they didn't actually buy all the pay-per-views, which again, I probably would have did the same thing as a college kid. Like, you just get lazy eventually and, whatever. So, but it was like that. We were all this grassroots effort, right? And so the message boards popped up and it was really cool because they're real clicky and you could meet a lot of people that we would talk to. Joe Rogan was on there like during Fear Factor. And that's why I think he has such a good solid base now because like everybody talked to Joe Rogan. It wasn't like Joe Rogan was like a man of the people, right? And it was cool because like people could go, even though it wasn't necessarily true, it was kind of true. You can be like, I'm friends with that guy on Fear Factor. And you could tell your girlfriend that, or you could tell your wife that, and they'd be like, no, you're not. And then you can go on the internet and be like, look, we were talking back and forth, right? Like, so you're not really friends with him, but it's kind of in it.
Internet friends,
Yeah, it wouldn't just be him. It'd be like all these people, right? So it was kind of like the grassroots effort. We kept everything alive. But along those times, there's a lot of really cool stories. I know Rogan's brought up one of the stories on his podcast, and I remember that, where this guy that he knows, him and Eddie Bravo knew, like killed a guy. And I remember the whole thing. He put him in a rear naked choke and killed the guy. And they called Mate Leone. And it ended up, and it was like, he's brought up the story several times. It was a guy that was complete fake.
Oh, Rafael Torres?
Yes, that's exactly it. Yes, and he ended up buying, the guy was fight over some people, right? And he ended up killing this, whatever. The girl he was dating this other person. He ended up killing that person. But anyway, that was all on the internet, right? That was like, we knew that story. And then there was this famous guy, maybe his name was Knight, but he was a black porn star, right? And he would sit and talk about all these porn star things, and everybody really got into it. And he ended up playing with, or training with Eddie Bravo. Tyler Knight was his name, I think. Great stories. But anyway, the point is, so we all hung out there. So about that time is because you could see how popular it was getting. So there's a lot of people that pretended to be black belts. Huge. So Don knows where I'm heading.
I know where we're going with this. Yeah.
So it ended up being there's a group of people that they called the BJJ police, more or less. And roundabout, I feel like Don became one of the BJJ police, definitely for West Virginia,
Sure.
if not more. And like, and I'll be honest, I didn't have the balls to do it because I was like, even I was a young asshole kid, but I still was like, I'm not gonna like just attack people. But Don was all in, man. He
Yeah.
didn't care.
Yeah. So there was an instructional video on, because Eddie
Yeah,
Bravo was pulling off the Twister.
on this one, do not mention the names, please.
I won't. Yeah. Yeah. So Eddie Bravo came out with a video about doing the twist, or he was pulling off the twisters, but he did not release an instructional, right? He wanted to save that for his book because he knows that people pirate videos. So someone else on the East Coast, not too far from here, put out a twister instructional, and it wasn't bad. You know, it wasn't bad, like the setups and stuff.
Truth,
but yeah,
let's give credit where it's good. That's the truth. It's actually a good dip because I'll tell you what, because of what you did, not to cut you off, but Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo, both specifically Eddie Bravo mostly, contacted me, and they even said the video is actually not bad, but who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah. So he puts out this video on the Twister, and he talks about, he had his own jiu-jitsu system, and he didn't call it BJJ, but you know, he also was talking about, you know, 28 years wrestling experience. That was on his bio and stuff. And you know, I started wrestling in 1988. I don't tell people that my wrestling experience goes back to 1988, but this guy, to build up himself, he said that. He put out the video, and then at some point, there was a guy who promoted him to BJJ black belt. So that guy was from Pennsylvania. And then, you know, I was in communication with that guy because at the time, Butch, we still had VHS tapes. Like this was, so that DVD for the Twister came out, but you know, there were still people using VHS players, and on eBay, people were still selling VHS tapes. So I had bought some instructionals, and then I kept in touch with this guy, and we became friends. And then he promotes this guy to BJJ black belt. So I was like asking the guy in Pennsylvania.
Which was his instructor. That's the weird part of the story, right?
It was, yeah. So he's like, I promoted my instructor. Yeah, it's very weird. And I was like finding out about this guy from Pennsylvania. I was like, you know, I'd known him, and I was like, that doesn't sound right, because we'd been talking, and there's a video of him, the guy in PA, going to a guy in Philly and he had like a tattered brown belt, and he goes up, this is the best day of my life. And then the guy from Philadelphia, who's a legit BJJ black belt, like hugs him and this guy is the brown belt is a giant, right? Like, so he puts a black belt on him, and they hug and they do this whole thing. And then the guy in Pennsylvania, who's a new black belt, promotes the guy that did the Twister video. And I was like, this isn't right. I said, I know the guy in Pennsylvania. I said, he was not a BJJ brown belt. I was like, you know, and I got the story that he found a guy who opened up, he split he was part of another academy in Philadelphia. He split. He was having some issues. And this guy reached out to like shotgun, like everybody on the East Coast, saying, hey, I want to test for a black belt. I want to test. And this guy's like, all right, I'll test you. So he tested him for his black belt, gave him whatever amount of money. And then they put together the video where he gets his black belt. And I called him out. And then I called out the other guy that made the Twister video. And boom, the guy in Pennsylvania is like, okay, so maybe he's not a black belt. He is probably a purple belt. So, you know, that deal's there right there. And then the guy who made the Twister video, he gets called out for that, because when you're promoted to black belt, you can't promote a black belt. Like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like you can only promote 2 ranks below you. So a new black belt can promote a purple belt, right? Like Gary, like if you have people that you promote on a purple belt, like they're going to be Butch's purple belts. Like you can put the belt on them and, you know, but they're Butch's purple belts, right? So, you know, so this guy was saying, you know, we're like, well, even if he was a black belt, which he's not, you know, you can't promote someone to black belt. And side note, we've seen a lot of new black belts do that, which, you know, we don't recognize that stuff. So this guy got butthurt at me because he's actually from not too far away from here. And, you know, I called him out saying he's not a black belt. And I said, hey, he might be a good jiu-jitsu guy. He might be able to twister me. I was like, come by anytime. I was like, you know where our address is. I said, you can come by anytime. I said, we can do kickboxing, we can do MMA, we can do jujitsu. I said, we can do any of those. And at the time, like I was training a lot and I was really, really good at the time, and I had no fear of some fake black belt coming in and me not being able to tap him 800 different ways. And then that was for him, that became like a monumental event in his life because he went to a couple different jiu-jitsu schools and, he went, left his ego at the door and, he became able to train with some of those other schools. He had a, wrestling background, some submission stuff. And, he learned from, a couple people. And, he went to a couple different gyms. Like he might've gone to one academy and he trained there for a little bit. And then he went to another one. And, eventually he found his home in Tennessee. And my understanding, what's that?
He's legit.
Yeah, like my understanding is like he is phenomenal at jiu-jitsu now.
Yes, absolutely.
But this would not have happened if we allowed him to pretend he was a black belt and not learn from somebody, right? So people will say that like me calling him out was like the best thing that could ever happen for his jiu-jitsu. Like he actually came up to me at the Arnold Classic and like my guys were in the stands. I'm walking up. He not tapping on the shoulder. He's like, hey, he said, I just want to introduce myself. And he said his name and we shook hands and he was competing. And I actually coached him at one of his matches at the Arnold Classic, right?
Amazing, actually.
What's that?
It's amazing, actually.
Yeah. That's how the jiu-jitsu community is, right? Like this guy's relatively local. I knew that he'd taken his lumps, from some recent schools. And I think he'd earned his blue belt at that point, right? And he went to the Arnold Classic. And then, like I said, at some point, I think he moved to Tennessee and, he went purple, brown, and he's black and he's legit, right? But none of this would have happened had he not been called out on the internet, right? And I never got to roll with him. Like that never happened. But when I saw him roll at the Arnold Classic, like when I coached him, like he was blue belt, like he was not on my level. I might have been purple brown belt at the time, but I mean, there was no question that he was a blue belt, right? Like at that time.
No, it's hard because we're being nice. There's a lot of details of that story that make it phenomenal, really. But also, I want to bring it up because I think you might have been involved in a couple other things. That was a big thing, like the BJJ police, right?
Sure.
And it wasn't just you; it was everybody because it would happen all the time. Like for example, I had a Hoist Gracie seminar one time. Back in basically the time that I got my ass kicked, but maybe the seminar after, like a brown belt showed up and he was completely fake. It was like one of those people, and I'll just put this out there right now too, and I don't want to smash traditional martial arts guys, but the reason I'm going to say this is, look, I am part of several martial arts Hall of Fames. I don't know if you are, Gary or Don.
In my mind, I am, right? In my mind.
Yeah. Well, and let me throw this out here too real quick because I did start a West Virginia Martial Arts Hall of Fame and Don, you are in it. I don't think I ever made anything official.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's just throw it out there. Gary, you're not in it because you're in Ohio, so fuck you. But I did start it. I made it not super official and I haven't made it official. So let's just put it this way. You're in it. Ashley's in it. All the known suspects are in it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hopefully I'll get it in someday if you guys elect me because the point was I started it. I can't put myself in it. So I'm hoping once I have a bunch of people.
I'll nominate you for sure.
That's what I want. Yeah. So someday. But the point is, I made a real one because what happens is I was getting all these emails and they'd be like, hey man, I've been watching on the internet. If you send me $350, you're in the United States Martial Arts Hall of Fame. All you're gonna do is send me $350. I'll send you a plaque, blah, 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 right? I knew that was bullshit from the get-go, but I did do it like once or twice. And the reason was my original trainer, Leon Ramsey, brought it up to me, who is also, he's the West Virginia Boxing Commission guy now. And he's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, why don't we accept these? And I was like, well, because they're bullshit, right? He's like, they might be, but when somebody walks into Joe Blow's studio and they say, I'm part of 7 martial arts Hall of Fames, that's all the people care about. They don't ask details, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of laid it out. There's more to the story, but he laid it out. So I was like, that actually does make sense. And so I accepted for that reason and I do get those questions. Sometimes people walk in and they we're making that joke at the beginning. People say, "What's your lineage?" Right? And they want to ask these dumb questions, but they're not always jujitsu guys. They're just random people, and
Sure.
they're like, "Well, because I went to so and so's place."
A Gracie school, right? I went to a
Yes,
Gracie
and
place.
it could be all these other things. They've got all these things, and so the point was that we do need that for a certain thing because just like you said, like if somebody comes into Gary's school, for example, and Gary's like, "Well, I'm a brown belt," and they're like, "Shit, man, well, my niece is a black belt and she's sick." Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, and this is
third degree black belt, right? Yeah.
I will say this. Now, I've talked a little bit about my competitive stuff on here, and I've been on Fight to Win and stuff like that, and I don't talk too much about it. However, if anybody wants to come in, they can look at my medal. That my medal count is on the wall.
yeah.
And,
I wanted to go ahead. I'll talk about go ahead, fill your medal thing.
my medal count's on the wall, and those were all hard earned. And I've got Naga belts, and I've got new breed belts, and I was on Fight to Win, and I IBJJF medals, and I've got Ohio State champion and West Virginia State champion, and like, and this is, I'm not trying to blow myself up, but like when you go to competition, at best, what do you guys think? Maybe 10% of the people who train go to competition.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And out of those 10%, 1 to 2% of those people end up on the podium every time that they're there.
Absolutely.
I was one of the 1 or 2%. So and that's all. I'm not the best. I'm still, and even though, and I've talked about this, I'm probably better at jiu-jitsu than 99% of the people who do jiu-jitsu, and I still suck.
But Gary, here's the thing. Like, we know that, but for your average Joe, they
don't understand.
Yeah, they don't understand.
No, they know about, 8th degree master that comes from Washington, D.C. to teach their 3rd degree master son that's 12 years old. And before I forgot to mention, so those medals back there are my wife's medals for running and for trial. Those are not my jiu-jitsu medals. My jiu-jitsu medals, they're in the basement. Those are for her triathlon, marathon, lots of half marathons. And like those are not my medals, but we switched offices during COVID, and I just haven't moved them up to our office yet.
They're very
my medals are in the basement.
They're good job.
I saw those medals. You're like, damn, he used to compete. I was like, mine are in the basement. Those are my wife's running medals. Oh.
Yeah, no, I don't remember where I was going with that story. I'm sure there was a point, but
well, I think the point was it's important. Yeah, it's important to have that Hall of Fame stuff because it is what sells your gym.
I think you were talking about a brown belt coming, and then I might have another story after. Yeah, but go ahead. You had a brown belt coming.
Yeah, and that was the point too, actually, because he was inducting Royce Gracie into some fucking bullshit martial arts. You know what I mean? So he wrote me before the seminar, and I think he was trying to get in free because the seminar was like, there's a lot back then. It was like $100, and this was in the late '90s, so that's even more now, right? I still basically charge $75, right? But Royce was winning so much to come in even back then. But we covered it. But he was like, yeah, let's come in. And the funny story about that is, so that guy he was a brown belt supposedly. And so the way that Royce would do it is he would teach a seminar, and then he would say like, hey, if you've trained longer than a year, stay on the mat. And so then everybody would stay on the mat, and then you'd roll, and then he would go around, and then he'd ask every group who won. So if it was, Gary, you and I, and you said, I won, he'd be like, okay, you stay on the mat. And then he would just kind of like keep whittling people down, right? And then he'd start ranking people that way, which is a tough way. But like, here's the good and bad of it. It was cool, but also, how people are. Like, some people, like, they have an off day. Some people, it's not exactly great. Because I remember, like, for my example, like, I rolled my ass off with Royce, that exact story that I just told you, that early on where I was like, Royce kicked my ass, broke my arm, smashed my whatever. Then the next like roll or the roll 2 after, he gave me Tim Dunlap from Ground Zero Huntington.
And he went balls to the wall.
He went to balls, and he also doesn't like me or didn't like me at the time, I'm sure. Right? That's basically when we didn't really get along. And I was like, hey man, like just go light because I just got my ass kicked. He went not light.
Yeah.
And so it sucked, and I'm sure I didn't do well, but that effect, because I remember I think he got. At that seminar, whether he took it or not, he got a 3-stripe blue and I got a 2-stripe blue. And I remember being kind of pissed because I was like, well, I'm every bit as good as that guy. At least we're the same. But Hoist just beat me up for a half hour, and then I had to go with that guy. That's not fair. You know what I mean? Like, anyway. And I remember another guy being mad because he was like sick, and he was a guy that I was like neck and neck with, and then he'd write me and be like, well, I was sick, and he ended up not getting a blue belt, period.
Oh gosh.
He just competed. He just rolled so horribly because he had like pneumonia or something, you know, and he was
Yeah.
like, well, that's not fair, you know. Anyway, good and bad. But so the story was that I keep forgetting was, so I roll with this brown belt. I beat him. So I'm on cloud nine. I'm like, I just beat a brown belt,
That's a
man.
brown belt. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then Hoist comes over to me and he's like, how'd you do with that guy? You know, and I'm like, I just tapped him like 4 times, smiling, happy. He's like, that guy's no brown belt. I'm like, what do you mean, motherfucker? I just tapped him. What are you trying to say? I suck? And he's like, yeah, he's no brown belt. And it was true. Like looking back, you know, like, because I remember the guy triangled me or tried to triangle me, but like I was doing a double underpass, right? And he triangled me, but he didn't do it right. He didn't even put his arm in, and he was like, because I was like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, well, that's a naked triangle. But like at the time, I thought he
He's
was
an Eddie Bravo student, man. The naked triangle.
That's what I'm saying. That didn't even
No, I'm
exist
trying-
at
yeah.
that time. That is a thing, but you got to
Yeah.
put your arm in and do stuff. And I was like, what's he talking? You know?
Yeah.
And then so then when the Hoist started questioning him, he's like, well, Hoyler gave me my brown belt. And he's like, well, where'd Hoyler give you his brown belt? Because, you know, obviously Hoyler.
That's his brother. Yeah.
And he's like, well, he went to me at a seminar in Philadelphia. And that's when he was like, I can't remember, but there's a big guy that he was with in Pennsylvania at that time, David Aviv.
Yep. David Adib
So Hoist literally went out in the hallway and called
called him. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. This is like how old, like you could do that back then. And then he's like, I don't know who this guy is. And so then they commenced to beat the shit out of this guy for being a liar. And the guy had all these certificates with him because he was like trying to play some game and ended up getting his ass kicked pretty hard.
So
and then
Dave,
he also was told, like, if you ever use my brother's name again, I'll kill you.
for
I will
sure.
find you, and I will kill you.
So I mean, yes, because David was active on the jiu-jitsu gear, NHP gear, and there was someone too that I helped him call out, and he thanked me for that. At that, like he's another one.
So is that another West Virginia guy? Because I think I was involved in the 2 stories. Like, about.
Was that the guy that supposedly got his brown belt from Atlanta? No, that's a different guy. The referee.
This guy, and again, you know, not to use names, but I later became friends with this guy just like you did. And you know, so for that matter, the last story we said, I want to finish up with, I am friends with that guy. That guy, anything that went wrong, he made right. And Don did a good job by saying that guy's a legit black belt, because he is. And he humbled himself and kicked some ass, and he made it right. We did say that. But this other story, this guy had a nickname that involved an animal.
Yep, from Australia.
Yes, exactly. So
anyway,
and we became. And listen, that guy, you saw the guy. He reffed.
Yeah, poor guy. Like he's got some other. Jiu-jitsu is the least of his worries, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that the same thing happened with that guy. He said he got a black belt, and they called Hoyler, and they said it wasn't true. And that guy didn't ever switch anything, but
we know. Yeah, we know.
Yes, it was a different time. Like, I don't know if people still do that. Gary, do you know? Maybe because I also don't get on message boards anymore, right? That's also where we'd find stuff a lot. So you get on a message board and somebody say, hey, somebody in West Virginia says they're a black belt. Do you know who he is? And then people search it down and they're like, no, because I called Hoyler, he's not. I called this guy, he's not. Is that still a thing, Gary? It's not like you're more active than we are, but
I would say probably about the time that I started jiu-jitsu, you were still seeing people get called out online. And there would be videos of people outing fake black belts or fake brown belts or something like that. But it's been a while. I think the last video that I seen somebody being like, oh, whatever, was the guy who promoted himself to black belt. Like that was one of the last ones that I've seen, but it's few and far between. Nowadays, I think what you see more than anything is people saying that they have trained, and they'll come into places and be like, well, you know, I trained with such and such, and it's all MMA fighters. It's not jiu-jitsu anymore. It's like, hey, I trained with Rumble Johnson, and I've been training in Florida with Rumble Johnson for the last 6 years. And you know, I do this and I do. Yeah. And so they train MMA. They don't train jiu-jitsu anymore. They're not black belts. And if they train MMA, then they don't have to claim any kind of belt to prove any kind of lineage, to prove any kind of actual skills, you know?
So Butch, the guy who promoted the guy that made the Twister video was a professor at a school in Pennsylvania. And funny enough, like I came across a picture in one of my friend's jujitsu class pictures in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And that guy was in there, and he was a brown belt. And I messaged my friend and I was like, hey, I said, is that so and so? He's like, yeah. He's like, he's great. I love that guy. Blah blah blah. I said, I've known him for so long. I said, that guy, you know, and I went through the whole thing. I said, did he come to Phoenix, you know, saying he was a black belt? They said, no, he came with a purple belt. So he's one of those guys that, you know, who paid whatever amount to test for a black belt in Philadelphia. He got a black belt, and then it became a purple belt. So he never had a blue belt. Then he moved to Phoenix, and then he joined up with another legit team out there. I mean, he'd smash me in public. Like he's a giant, right? And if he's training with those guys now, like he's really good. And he was a brown belt because my friend was a brown belt too. I was like, just so you know, like that he was really shady. They said, oh, he's a good guy now and all this stuff. I was like, I'm just letting you know, like there's a lot of stuff about that guy that, you know, I don't know if he's a black belt now, but he was a brown belt a few years ago in Phoenix.
You know, yeah. And here's the sad part for me is that I ended up being in the middle of all those after you got the hornet's nest, you know, stirred up. Like I had to deal with all the other stuff, which is fine. I'm joking about it now, but yeah, don't forget, he also had a brother that trained at my gym. I got a phone call from, you know, some people, and they were threatening to kick my ass. I'm like, look, I have nothing like that. Pissed me off because we were all young then. Like, you don't threaten to kick my ass. I was like, first of all, I'll kill you, just like we always said, you know. And then it became a thing, and I was like, but then second of all, like, yeah, that same guy that you're talking about had a brother that I think he was at my gym and taking a Hoist Gracie seminar as a white belt, and then later became a black belt like 6 months later, right? So there's a lot more to that story. And in the same with the other story, the guy that I said rhymes with an animal, I mean, that kind of all started because the guy started teaching at my place as a black belt.
Oh gosh.
We kind of started figuring out early on because he wouldn't roll with anybody that maybe this is a little bit suspect. And then ultimately, two other guests that we had on the podcast, Mike Stump and Jason Campbell, actually broke the story loose because they called Hoyler Gracie and Hoyler and some other people. There was a guy that is now deceased named Sukari at Team Alliance.
Yes. Yeah.
Who also, you know, listen, man, it's funny because even that story, I'll tell another quick story is that, as I remember, so I don't know if you guys ever went through this, but I had a seminar with Sukari. He was a black belt in Team Alliance. And he was pretty good, right? But there was...
He was a good purple, I mean, right?
Yeah, there was some other issues with Sukari because he had some students that went to his gym but are also Hoist students, and there were some issues with all this stuff. So anyway, when the guy that we mentioned being a fake black belt, he was like, "Hey man, you should have my instructor in. His name's Sukari. You should have him down." And I said, "Sure. Any chance I could have to train with a black belt? That's great. I'm in West Virginia, right?" So I was like, "Yeah, bring him down." I have nothing bad to say, but the seminar was good. I rolled with him. I will say this though, and this is when I started questioning his black belt. We had a 30-some minute match. I was a blue belt at the time. It's 30 minutes. Now, let's preface this by saying I didn't exactly do the greatest. I was in his guard. I couldn't pass his guard. He also couldn't submit me for 30 minutes. So it was like a really boring jiu-jitsu match, right? I'm also pretty big, so it is what it is. So at the end of 30-some minutes, I think they just called the match. I don't know how hard he was going either. That's the other thing you need to preface things with, right?
I mean, a BJJ black belt would probably not let a blue belt survive for 30 minutes.
You would think, right? But who knows?
Yeah.
Could have been. It could also be an off day, right? But at the end of the seminar, he gave me a purple belt, which was awkward because I'm under Hoist, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't say like, hey, I can't do that. So there's a bunch of pictures floating around with me with purple belt, but I didn't even think of anything of it because I wasn't going to wear it, right? I was like, yeah, thank you. Then some people from Huntington, I think, contacted Hoist, right?
Oh, gosh.
So there was also why there was kind of a little bit of animosity between me and the Huntington guys, but it really wasn't, right? Like, I get it too. I probably would do the same thing. It's like somebody posted it like, hey, Butch got this. And they were like, hey, I thought Butch was under you, Hoist. And just stirred the pot, right? So then Hoist, actually wasn't him, it was his manager, Mike Kogan. But anyway, he wrote me and said, hey, what's this? And
Team Rock, Mike Kogan, I remember that.
He's actually still the manager of like a bunch of famous people. I think the Diaz brothers and everything. He's famous, right?
It's awesome.
Yeah, so he wrote and said, "Hey, what?" And it was pretty cool. He's like, "What's the deal with this?" And I said, "Just exactly that story." I was like, "He gave me a purple. I wasn't gonna be rude, so I just there's some pictures, but I'm not wearing it. I mean, you can look at the pictures the next day. I've got my blue belt on. You know, it's fine." And their main question was like, "Why did you have him for a seminar?" And I said, "Well, 'cause I see hoists once a year.
Yeah.
It only behooves me to have as many people as I can here." And they're, you know, of course they were just a little perturbed by that. And then they're like, "Why don't you have Rodrigo in? Why don't you have Hoyler in?" I was like, "Cause you've never asked." So like,
Yeah.
you know, and anyway, it was not a big deal. And it is what it is. But the point was like, it was a weird scenario. I rolled with this guy. I had a feeling he might not be a black belt either. Although I think he had stripes on his black belt. It was really strange. The whole thing was strange, right? I was like, man, how do I keep getting in these weird situations?
You're a magnet for that kind of stuff, man. No, I think the problem was because we didn't have a local BJJ black belt. People kind of thought
Yeah,
they could sneak in here, right?
that is the true story. And I also, when we go back to the beginning, like where I say I'm an introvert, like I'm not like so the difference between Don and I, like these stories just say I probably had the exact same feelings as Don. Don went after the people on the internet, like, "Hey, why are you saying you're a black belt? Fuck you." And I was more like talking about these people behind their back, like, you know what I'm saying, like, "Hey, like," but that's how my personality especially was at that point. I was just real shy and not very outspoken, which doesn't make sense to anybody. I get it now when they're like, "You have a podcast, you do this, you do that. How are
For
you an
sure.
introvert?" There's you know, we can all do things that's not my personality. As soon as I get off this podcast, I'll be sitting in a room in a corner shaking because it's too much information. It's like it's not my personality, right? Like it's a different thing. But it's interesting. So that's the point. Like I also think I'm a magnet to those situations because I'm so nice and I let things go, even if I know there's something like because I rolled with the guy that we're talking about that rhymes with an Australian animal. I knew he wasn't a black belt at the time, but I was like, I would just tell people. I think I'd probably even email you down and say, "Hey man,
Yeah.
that guy ain't a black belt. Why don't you go after him?"
Yeah.
You say
and,
something. He might
and
be
I,
in my gym. Why don't you say something? You know, like
and I don't remember how it went. I think I went after him, and then he responded saying that he was actually a brown belt, and then I think he hurt his back, broke his back in an accident, and then I think he said Jacare, not even Sakuri. I think he said Jacare actually promoted him as to be a black belt because he thought he would never get an opportunity to be a black something
you're
one of those deals,
absolutely right.
but still to be a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, man, like. I remember Gary, you guys were talking about, you know, the Jean-Jacques podcast and things like that. Like I think there's a podcast with Joe, with Jean-Jacques and maybe with Henzo, talking about like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt is a black belt in disguise. I use that all the time because, you know, our black belt, our brown belts are, you know, they're there, right? Like Clint's like, you know, but you've seen Clint at tournament. Like last time I rolled with Clint, like we did Gi a couple Saturdays ago, like he ate my lunch, man. Like he beat me like he owned me because a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a black belt, right? Like,
Absolutely.
and as Jean-Jacques and Henzo say, in disguise. Like, so for that person who was like an animal from Australia, like for him to say he was a brown belt at that time, man, those brown belts were good, like
Yeah.
really good.
I would
You know,
almost argue. What do you think? Don? Do you think they're better than they are today? It's a hard question, right? Because I don't think jiu-jitsu is watered down, but there's so many more blue belts and purples than there were back in the day, right?
I'd say that like for us, we've tried to maintain the standard, right? Like I call it like the parking lot tough. Like our blue belts, our curriculum hasn't changed. Our white belts and blue belts might be doing better in competitions than they were before, maybe competing more, but we still have the same standards, same testing. So, because what we don't want, we never want that to be watered down. Because when you go to an academy, when someone travels, goes on vacation, and they want to roll somewhere, like the instructor's blue belts are the litmus test. Like, you know, they're going to have their blue belts roll with you, Gary, when you go to Myrtle Beach, right? Before the purple belt rolls, you're going to roll with the blue belt. You're not going to roll with the white belt. Like, they're going to put you up against the blue belt. So I believe we're seeing like across the boards, probably maybe a lower standard for purple, not in our academies, like for us, right? Like for you, for us, but
Yeah.
maybe across the world, right? Like, because purple belt used to be that belt. Like, you know, when a purple belt walks into an academy in Brazil, the black belts take notice. They get nervous, right? Because we always tell our guys too, like the purple belt, knows the same moves as the brown belt and the black belt. The purple belt just can't put them together the same way. But I believe, I don't think that the blue belt standard has been lowered yet. I believe maybe we're seeing more purple belts at a level that they shouldn't be yet. I think the brown belts are still, I'm guessing they're still like, man, those two guys are still like almost black belts, right?
So I'll tell you, the most worried that I ever was as to the legitimacy of my belting was the Ohio University MMA club asked me if I could teach them Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I agreed. I started working with the guys. Now this is pre-COVID, 2018 is when I started working with, I think it was October 2018. I worked with them 2019, 2020 came obviously. But so all of 2018, 2019, I was working with them. I didn't get my brown belt from Butch yet. And there was a little bit of time where I was kind of like doing my own thing. I wasn't under anybody and I was kind of floating. And I was working with the Ohio University MMA club. And there was a program that a whole bunch of Brazilian students had came to Ohio University. And they said, hey, Gary, they contacted us.
Yeah.
They're gonna be, yeah, and they're gonna be, hey, there it is. So working with those guys, these Brazilian guys got a hold of the OU MMA club and said, hey, we want to come in and train. When are you guys doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And well, Gary's here on Tuesday nights and sometimes he's here on Saturday mornings. And said, okay, well, we'll be there Tuesday night. They called me up and they're like, hey, Gary, they're coming Tuesday night. Most of them are white belts, but there's a brown belt and a black belt coming too.
What?
Yeah. And now I'm thinking like, oh shit, here I am, this purple belt, and I've been teaching these guys the best that I can twice a week, and they've got a brown belt, or there's a purple belt maybe, and I don't know if the black belt's coming, and then I get to roll with them, and the black belt felt like everybody that I really rolled with who was really good.
Yeah.
Didn't tap me. I didn't tap him.
Yeah.
But it felt like a regular roll. Same thing when I rolled with the blue or the brown belt, and I was able to tap the brown belt one time or whatever. And it was like that legit. Everything else, like it was, it was nice to go to competitions and win. It was nice to go. And before that, I'd already had a victory over a black belt in competition. And I'd submitted brown belts in competition because I was in the advanced category in no-gi. So I was already rolling with black belts in the United States, but I'd like real Brazilians. And I was like, man, I've got to show up.
So this guy was from Brazil and he was studying at OU?
For like a few months, whatever program he was at school in Brazil, they were doing some sort of program. I don't know what he was studying or whatever. We didn't really have a chance to chit chat too much because it was just class. But they came and they just wanted to get some rolls in.
Yeah.
And while they were here, like one of them was a black belt, one of them was a brown belt, and then maybe there was a purple, but then the rest were white belts. They had done jiu-jitsu, but it wasn't their everyday life. And of course, me being a stupid American, I just assume everybody in Brazil does jiu-jitsu. And you don't realize it's like, no, they don't. Like it's not unlike here. Like it's just kind of a thing that some people do and not everybody does it. But so rolling with those guys is like, that made me feel good about my jiu-jitsu. Sure. It made me feel legitimate as far as like when I train, my level of training is just as good as what they're seeing anywhere in the world. So
for sure. And I'm sure that before they got on the mat too, they understood that, hey, if there's a purple belt there, like this isn't going to be a pushover. And they probably wanted, hey, we haven't been training. We'd like to get with somebody that's got experience. And they didn't want to come there and teach, right? They wanted to come there and learn, right? But no, that speaks about your training. I thought you're going to come back and say, and then I find out that he's not a black
belt. No, he was legit. It was definitely rolling with like high level guys. So there was no slack in his game. But those guys, like all of it was a good experience because, like I said, it made me feel like that everything that we did in Ohio, sure. All the competitions that I went to, AGCs, the WVGOs, the Nagas, that's legit, sure. Jiu-jitsu. And you know, it wouldn't be legit if it wasn't for guys like you calling out the fake guys.
Sure. No, I mean, they need that because, again, some of these guys wouldn't be if they took the right road, they wouldn't be where they are today. Like we've had other people come to us and say, "Hey, I want to get ranked in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu." We said, "Okay, train. You know, at some point we'll give you the blue belt curriculum." And then we've had guys say, "I'm not interested. I want you to give me a blue belt." And we're like, "Not going to happen." Then we've seen those people maybe go to other places and get a purple belt. And then one of them might even be a brown belt now, you know, and we're like, we're glad that we didn't take them, you know, into our program, because if you don't have the experience as a blue belt, like how can you teach someone later who's a blue belt and tell them what it's like, right? Or when you skip these belts, like if you want to skip belts, then why get a belt, right? Like your black belt should mean something. Your brown belt should mean something. Same with your purple and your blue. And then we also have the guys who want to rush through. I want to be a black belt in 4.5 years or whatever. Like, why the not? What's the significance of that? You know, for me, it was like when I was a brown belt and Randy Bloom wanted to promote me, I was very comfortable as a brown belt at that point, right? Like, Butch, like after a while, you're like, when you first get to that level, you're like, I don't feel like I'm there yet. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel like. And then after I was in my brown belt for 6 months or so, I was like, hey, I feel it. And then at the 2-year mark, I was like, I'm really comfortable. And then, you know, Randy said, you know, I'd like to promote you. And, you know, I wasn't, you know, going to say anything to you. I was just like, the problem is you can't go backwards, right? Like, so when I became a black belt, like if I would compete at a big show, I'm competing against Saulo Ribeiro, like Rodrigo Medeiros, like I can't go backwards. So, you know, I took it and I grew into my black belt, right?
No, well, I want to mention this too. Like, it's funny because I guess it's a weird way of how we all come full circle in a weird way. I remember having this conversation with you. I was working in MRI at CMC in Charleston, West Virginia, but somehow I think you called me and you were like, hey, I'm in California and I got my black belt. I think Randy Bloom gave it to me. But your main concern, I don't know if you've ever had this conversation with him, but you were really concerned about Phil. You're just like, I hate.
I didn't want to get my black belt before Phil got his black belt, right?
Yeah. So you called me, I think, to just talk to me about it and just talk it out, right? We talked, and I was like, and I really appreciate the phone call because it was like we're all friends, but it's still like a beautiful, important phone call to have. And I was like, look, I don't have the words to give you, especially that time because I wasn't as mature as I am now. I think maybe I had some more things to say, more wisdom, but I was like, I don't know. I love you guys. I was like, you were like, yeah, we got to figure this out. Like, what do you think? And then that's when you started thinking like, hey, maybe we can get this done at this tournament. Cause that's how I ended up being there. You're like, I want everybody to be there.
Yeah.
We're going to make it a big deal. And you're the one that planned most of this. Even when you're saying his son brought it out, I'm pretty sure you probably had that plan. I would almost.
Yeah. We came together with the idea, like, that was so meaningful to him because his son was actually training, right? So his son coming out with, I think my son might've been wearing a gi at the time, but you know, and he might've competed that day too, but it was meaningful for him because his son was training jiu-jitsu also, right?
Yeah. And that's, yeah. And I drove, 3 hours to be there. I mean, we had people competing anyway, but it meant something. Like I knew I had to be there, because you guys mean something to me. It wasn't like
we were there for your promotion with Marcel,
absolutely.
It's good. We could all share in those milestone moments, right?
Yeah, which again, actually, now that you brought that up, so Gary, that you don't know this, but like when I was lucky when I got my promotion in 2009. I'm sure I just invited you guys, but I don't know if I thought that you would come, but you did. The other thing that was happening too is I had just got married, so it was like a double whammy, right? So I was having the reception of my wedding as well, and Don and I think Jeb, maybe. I know you guys were there.
Was there. I think his roommate Ryan Rooney, who fought Cody Garbrandt.
Yes,
Yeah, he's one of our blue belts who fought Cody. Phil, yeah, we had a crew.
My wife and I put a picture of us up and had people sign it, and I still have that picture hanging on my wall, and it's amazing because the picture was multiple things. I had got my black belt, but I also had the reception, and Don and them stayed. They went to the reception, which was amazing, and I had 2 cakes made. I had one for the wedding, and I had a black belt cake made, for jiu-jitsu. And the jiu-jitsu part at that point, I'm going to be honest, wasn't that important. It was cool. Like I got my black belt.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bigger day. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I had if I was more concerned about that my wife would have chopped my head off, right?
Yeah, cut you like the cake.
Yeah, it was a beautiful night. Looking back, I wish, it was all a blur, man. It was so crazy. I wish I'd have spent more time with you guys because it was a monumental thing. But it was cool that you guys got to partake because I didn't even have a gym at that point, Gary. I'd kind of briefly kind of quit jujitsu. I was just like, we always go through these ups and downs. I was meeting just had a lot of drama because I was dealing mostly with fighters at the time, and fighters always have drama. And I had a couple fighters that were fighting each other, and I was running a space in what they called it, the Ash Center at the time, but it was by a guy named Billy Ash, who's deceased now. But anyway, like my roommate was another guy named Adam Sepulveda.
Down in Florida, he's a black belt now too, isn't he?
Yeah, as a black belt under American Top Team, and those two weren't getting along, and I tried to stay out of it. But the problem was one was my roommate, right, and I was renting from the other.
Yeah.
So ultimately, those two got in a street fight, and it was a big deal. And it was a big deal in Charleston because the one guy was King of the Cage world champion, was wanting Rich Franklin was training him. They were wanting him to be an Ultimate Fighter. The other guy was unknown, but the other guy beat his ass in the gym every day, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the other guy's
Adam
problem.
was a tough guy, man.
Yeah, let's be honest, like Adam is a tough guy, but he also was really tough in the gym.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys that didn't perform as well did as in the gym. But the problem was, there's we're all young, there's a lot of animosity, so there's a lot of drama. And that fight went down. They fought in the street, and it was just a mess. And then I'm in the middle of it because the family's like, well, you ran off me, and your roommate just beat up my son or my brother.
Bad situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So even though I'm like, I had nothing to do with it, they didn't believe me because that's my roommate. They're like, how did you not have anything to do with it? The whole thing was a big mess. And so I ended up losing. And I don't even think they kicked me out per se, but I was like, look, I can't go back to this gym. And then Adam was not, I kicked him out of kind of my house. I didn't really, but he ended up moving to Florida, which he became an American Top Team. So at that point, I was like, look, I'm done with jiu-jitsu. There's too much drama, which it wasn't really jiu-jitsu, it was the MMA.
It was the MMA stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so at that point is when I decided, ultimately when I came back to jiu-jitsu, I was like, I'm done with the MMA, but I didn't have a gym. So to make all that stuff full circle that we just talked about, Scott Dixon, who was part of the Sports Jiu-Jitsu guys, helped me. Like we actually made amends. So I was like, hey man, like I know we do something different, but I'll help you with your jiu-jitsu, and I can bring you some guys, and can I come to your gym? And he let me use his gym on off times, and he really extended a great olive branch, and we became friends. And I was able to get promoted in his gym, which was essentially a karate sports jiu-jitsu type gym at the time. And like I said, it's roundabout. It came full circle. So those same guys that I started with, that I didn't like, that some things happened, we end up making friends. I'm still friends with a lot of those guys to this day. I was able to get that. And I was able to invite Phil and Don, and I think some of the other guys came. And it's funny because I look back at those pictures and I'm like, this is not even my gym. Like all those pictures, it's so weird.
Yeah.
Like the time that we had to go through. And but I
I
persevered.
think your buddy Scott was wearing a black belt that day. I'm saying.
Well, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Jim, right? But he's wearing.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like, a big old mess. You're right. Like I'm always involved in a big old mess. But the point was, I kind of came out of the woodwork, and through friends, through mental health. Really, that was the other thing. I was suffering. I was down in my life, and I came back to jiu-jitsu in 2009, and then I've never stopped since then. But there was a period of a year where I was done. I was like, I'm done with all these people. It's too much drama. I hate everybody. I just want to help, and everybody's, I can't help people because there's so much drama. Which ultimately, so anybody asks why I don't train fighters now, that literally is
that's it. That's it right there.
That was the day.
And Gary, like that might be something for you too. Like training fighters, it might not be drama, but it will add to your stress level, right? Like so, it's not necessarily like a bad thing, and it's not always going to add drama, but it will add to your stress level because running Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in and of itself is a full-time job, right? And if you add like a second element to that, because they're not exactly related, right? Like the BJJ guys don't go there because they want to get punched in the face, right? But the MMA guys have a different mentality, right? So that's up to you. Like if that's something, if you want to take on that level of stress, we do both, right? We do both. So we also have, as I've mentioned before, we have a bunch of great coaches, that work with different aspects. So, it's nice to be able to go in there and take a class or to train.
Yeah, and that's the difference between now and before is that, you know, you guys is one of the pioneers of jiu-jitsu, so which meant you were pioneers of MMA too, which meant you did it all. Right now, at least now you can split that up. You've got enough talented people that you can say, hey, why don't you run the boxing program? Why don't you run the kickboxing program? Why don't you run the MMA? And you could stay out of it if you want. You could add insight, but you don't have to be at every fight, every drama. You know that.
It's a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it changed things, and that's the beauty of today. That, you know, when I look back, there, you know, I could probably start some things, but also like I'm just like, look, man, I also don't want people mad at me if I can't go to fights. And
Sure.
now
You got enough going on with your tournaments and
yeah,
then
well,
with school. I mean,
I got 3 kids and a wife, and
yeah,
and I work multiple jobs, and so the weekend is my time with my family and kids, and if I spend that weekend now going to jiu-jitsu tournaments or MMA tournaments or this and that, and then it's more than that, right? Like it's not going to work out. So it's the best thing that's fair to my family, that's also fair to the fighter, because those fighters will also get
they
pissed
need
and
it.
come there,
Yeah,
and then I disappear. They're like, "Why did you disappear?" And I'm like, "Well, because my wife's pissed." Well, that's not good enough for them. They're getting ready for a fight, right?
sure.
Like, so we got to make that decision. But anyway, getting off that, I got 3 things, and we've been on here for a long time. Gary, are you getting bored yet? Are you all right?
No, I love it. All this conversation is great for me. I could never get bored talking about it. So go ahead.
So one thing before I go on to Misha Tate's mom jumped on Instagram, which I wanted I think she probably dropped off already. Her name's Michelle, and I don't always want to say this Misha Tate's mom because she's a beautiful lady and she has other daughters that are probably equally as awesome. So I don't want to say Misha Tate's mom, but if you're still on here, Michelle, you're awesome. And we love you, and your daughter is awesome, and your other daughters, at least the one I know of, you may have more than one, are probably awesome as well, and you're awesome.
Can my daughters come out and train with your daughter in Vegas or take pictures with them?
That's what I'm saying. And she's a beautiful lady. She's
Future fighters. We've got future fighters.
yeah, she's awesome. She reaches out to people that like her daughter, and that's probably why she reached out to me. She's called me before and asked some questions. My son, he's 14 now, but when Misha fought Ronda Rousey and Ronda Rousey snapped Misha's arm in half, that fight.
Yeah.
My son must have watched that 900 times, and not because he wanted to see the arm break, but I think he had a big crush on Misha, and so that was not a deterrent. Her arm I think it broke his heart so bad he watched it every day. Like
I'm not sure how old he was at the time. This is what, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah,
Maybe even more than that. But I had a crush on Misha Tate. So.
Well, I think everybody does.
She has lots of fans, and I remember Butch, when we were writing letters to the athletic commission about the safety of. Remember Dr. Filchio from Elkins? I believe he's also. Yeah, I think he's also a big fan of Cupcake. Yeah. So yeah, she has lots of fans in West Virginia. In case she would ever want to come and do a seminar and all that, you know.
I mean, and also, so you know, that's why Michelle's on here. She's been trying to help me for years. Misha's been shutting me down for years. So Michelle is our biggest advocate for getting her daughter in here, as much so that she tuned into this little podcast. Wonderful. And you know that she's part of real podcasts, not that we're not a real one, but you know, good for her. But anyway, besides that point, 3 things I want to, and we can take them in any order. I just want to forget. Let's start with 2 though. I want to understand, like, you went to the Philippines, which I have a lot of friends in the Philippines. Did you learn stand-up there or jiu-jitsu, or do you teach jiu-jitsu? So that's number 1. And number 2, before I forget, so you can take these in any order. I just want to forget. There is a 3rd thing, but I'm gonna say 2 at one time. The other is I want to talk about, because it is funny, when you reffed at the West Virginia games and you almost got in a fight. So let's talk about those 2 things in any order, and then a 3rd thing I'll bring up after you're done with those 2 things.
Sure. Can I run to the bathroom real quick? It's right there. Okay. I think Joe Rogan lets his guests use the bathroom. I'm going to run real quick.
I know this is fucked up. So Gary, we're going to have to take it.
No, that's okay.
Before Gary.
I mean, we normally don't go 3 hours. That's the issue, right? Now we're starting to do these 3-hour Joe Rogan podcasts. Yeah. I'm on 3 drinks now, so I'm getting in deep.
Yeah. Well, same here. These things are giant, but right before I came on here, just so you know, I did a little hike with my 2 youngest kids, which was fun. But it was a 3-hour hike. We kind of got lost. But it was good, man. I'll tell you what, I was very proud of my kids, because usually the youngest one, every hike we did before that, he would complain within 5 or 10 minutes that his legs were tired. He couldn't do it. So he did the whole one this time. We found some like bones he was all excited about. I felt like I was trying to cross a river by walking on a tree, and I fell. I was like I was not a great dad today, but and so my glasses fell in the river. They fished it out. They were super proud of that. There was like a bunch of stuff that happened that they were super proud of. Like the whole ride home, that like my son was like, yeah, if I wasn't there, man, you guys would never found that skull bone, would you? And I was like, no, man, I'm glad you're there. And he's like, yeah, if I wasn't there, your glasses there probably would have floated away, wouldn't it? I was like, yeah, man, I'm glad you were there to fish them out, So it was I sweat a lot. It was the point of why I don't have to pee. Don, you missed the conversation.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I probably suffer from the same syndrome then, because I don't know if you can tell, I'm a little glowy right now.
Yeah.
I sweat too. I don't have to pee very often either.
Well, you guys saw something where I posted about at the bottom. I said, hey, for every view that we get, hopefully a plastic surgeon will donate $1 from their pool of money for my hair. That's why I kept changing the lights, because man, they call that 5 head when your forehead's so big, right? That's 5 head right there.
Now, see, my problem, I'm getting the reverse yarmulke, and that's starting to sit in on me. I've talked about it before, but like I don't know, 4 years ago, it seems like everybody started taking pictures from behind and above me. I mean, like everything is just the bald head now.
That's when you're coaching on the mats. They get that view, right?
That's right.
So I went to the Philippines for medical school in May of 1997. I moved out there, and during my first year of school, I made friends with a guy who was from Northern California who wrestled, and I had just started with Ground Zero in January of 97. Earlier in 96, when they started April, Ashley and the crew, my older brother, who used to work at Elder Beerman, which was at the mall, department store there, he was in suit sales, men's clothing with Neil. Neil, my brother, sold suits there. So I've known Neil forever, even way before 96. And in school, I detailed cars. That was my, everybody has multiple jobs, right? So I detailed cars, and one day Neil came over, and I was like, hey, what's going on? He said, oh, your brother missed jiu-jitsu class. So my brother started jiu-jitsu before I did. He said, so your brother missed jiu-jitsu class. So, I had to come over and kick his butt because he missed. And my brother is looks like Dana White. Like my brother is like stocky, and, and people just don't kick my brother's butt, right? So this is how I got introduced to Ground Zero. Then I'll get to the Philippines. They did their I didn't even do anything. And then they did their training up in my house. And then my brother's like, hey man, you should check this out. You'd love it. Because I grew up in West Virginia, but I went to boarding school in Pennsylvania. So I actually started wrestling when I was 15 as a sophomore. And, most people in Pennsylvania start wrestling when they're like 4 or 5, right? And terrible time for me to start, but I didn't get discouraged. I tried really hard, and I became a below average Pennsylvania wrestler. And when I came upstairs in our townhouse, we moved everything up in the house, and then I got to roll with Neil, and and this is 1996, so you can imagine what it looks like, a guy who wrestled in 3 years in Western Pennsylvania against someone who is a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how that went. So I was not. I didn't feel like I needed to train jiu-jitsu right after that encounter. And again, I love Neil. We go way back. It's just, he was a white belt in jiu-jitsu. I wrestled for 3 years in Western Pennsylvania. So I didn't really feel like I needed to train with those guys. And then fast forward to January of 97, we all compete at something, right? Whether it's career or athletics. And I felt like I needed competition. So I signed up for a Half Gracie tournament, like in the back of some magazine, right? It was in Richmond. And in 3 weeks, I cut some weight and I started training Ground Zero. And then I went to Richmond and I got to compete. Like, Half was there, Dave Camarillo was one of his reps. Like, it was really cool, like, to know who those guys are now, back then. And so I kept training with Ground Zero from January until May. And as I trained with them, I put the gi on, and it became a different game than rolling around in my townhouse, wrestling, right? With the gi, they got good with their chokes, and I started learning jiu-jitsu. So, I went to the Philippines in May, and I didn't know where I could learn jujitsu. So, one of my wrestling buddies, I had Carlson Gracie Jr. had a 30-page booklet on jujitsu. And of course we had our VHS tapes, right, Butch, like our Gracie basics. And, I brought all that stuff out. So my friend and I started training some, in our apartments, some jujitsu, some submission wrestling and stuff. And then I found out there was one guy who was a striker in our med school class. And, he wanted to train a little bit. And he said, hey, there's a guy at the mall that I think is a blue belt under Carlson Gracie. He's like, maybe you can check him out, make sure he's legit. Because again, this is 1997. People are saying all kinds of things, but it's rare you would hear someone say that they're a blue belt that's not a blue belt. Usually I'm a brown belt or I'm a black belt, right? Like people didn't say, hey, I'm a blue belt, right? Like it's, hey, I'm a black belt, right? So I was like, I bet this guy's real. So I got to meet this guy named Miles Vivas. So you guys might know Mark. Mark runs New Breed out of Chicago, and Mark trains Eddie Wineland, and Mark's done Fight to Win and all that stuff. So this is Mark's baby brother. So the three Vivas brothers, Mike, Mark, and Miles. So I hooked up with Miles. I believe it was early 1998 at that point. And they had mats at their house, and there were about a handful of us that got to train jiu-jitsu with those guys. And Miles had graded me as like a 2-stripe white belt, and eventually he opened up an academy. And this was under Carlson Gracie Jr. So I started training with those guys. We did mostly gi stuff. And Miles is also an apprentice instructor under Ajahn Chai. So Chai Sirisuk, right? So the Muay Thai founder in the United States, right? And the oldest brother, Mike, is a full instructor. So I started training Muay Thai with those guys as well. When you were talking about, Vanderlei in Brazil and how he was confused with how this guy would come in this academy and do this, like in Brazil, people do that dojo storm stuff. Like Vanderlei would probably kill somebody that comes in his academy trying to do that stuff, right? Like no one would stop it either. And we live in a very civilized culture. And you were talking about the Hickson podcast. I'm watching his podcast on impact theory. I was watching that earlier today. And, and everyone who comes here credits us as being a very civilized culture. The Philippines is a beautiful, warm, and welcoming culture. As far as martial arts goes, it's very old school, where you prove your dominance, right? So, and there's even somewhat of a gang mentality within the martial arts, because everybody wants to be the best, and they don't want to really prove it in the academy. Like they want to prove it on the street. So Miles was a blue belt there, and Butch, there was a guy from Hoist Academy who was a blue belt, who was just south of Manila, but it's a very easy commute. So before I got in touch with Miles, I actually reached out to the Hoist affiliate, and he didn't talk to me on the phone. One of his friends did. And I told him my background and my interest in wanting to come train, and they did not have any interest in me training with them. So I was like, all right. So then, I was able to find Miles. Fortunately, I was able to find him, and I got to train with him. And then they got to let me know about what the culture's like there, about the culture of, violence and, people wanting to fight in the streets. And so we had an academy in Manila. And some of our guys, being in the Philippines, they trained stick fighting, and a couple of them were with the Lightning Scientific Group, and they were instructors, or they're almost full instructors. And outside of our academy, at some point, I think the two brothers were there outside the gate when a few of us were upstairs. I don't think I was there that day, but a few guys were upstairs, and some guys from like a rival school, like 5 or 6 of them, like beat these guys, like 2 of my guys, right?
Really?
And yeah, one of them actually was hospitalized for it. And he posts even to this day about some of those other guys, like, and this is 20 years later, right? Like, obviously, I mean, this guy almost died, right? Like, so these are 2 American guys from Michigan. One is a purple belt under Hanato Magno, and the other might be a purple belt under Mark Vivas. And they both they're back here in the United States. So, but one of them, like, really, it's possible if it didn't get broken up, like he could have probably been killed, because these other guys didn't like the fact that we're training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and didn't bow down to them or whatever. And Hoist wasn't aware of what the culture was like, and he just knew that he goes and teaches these guys, and that guy that was under Hoist had a rival who did not have a Jiu-Jitsu academy, but he had like a bunch of guys that they had like an MMA group, and we're not sure which group it was that attacked our guys, but it was one of those 2 groups. So me being an extrovert, and I was about 30 pounds heavier when I was in medical school. I lift, I like to lift a lot and stuff. I enjoyed nightlife, like going out all the time. So I was everywhere in the public eye. And a lot of the guys from the other places, would be at those establishments, these clubs and bars and stuff. And I would hear about fights and I'd hear about this stuff. But, I'm one of the smaller guys here, but I was one of the bigger guys in the Philippines. Like when I played basketball there, like I played forward and I played center, 5'9", 195 pounds. So nobody messed with me there. I don't know if it's because at some point, I was a blue belt at some point, 1999. And then maybe they'd known about my wrestling and things like that. But, I had gone on during medical school to teach the Saturday kids classes. So I would teach, I think, the gi classes for the kids on Saturdays. And then Sundays, I teach the kids the no gi, but I would train during the week when I was able to. And then I would teach, some jujitsu when I was able to. And then I would, train Muay Thai when I was able to as well. And, one of the proud moments, is teaching the kids class. And one of the 8-year-old kids came in and said, I got in a fight with a bully. And that kids have to tell their instructors they got to fight because we don't want to hear it from someone else, right? Like if you hear it like, hey, one of your guys, Gary, got in a fight, like you never want, it should always come from the kid. And I said, what happened? He said, there was a 13-year-old, this is an 8-year-old guy. He said, there's a 13-year-old kid who pushed me on the playground and was bullying me. He said, I didn't know what to do. So I shot a double leg, I took him down, and then I choked him. And I was super proud for that. And, that never happened to him again, right? So during all of my training over there, like I said, I was like being in Manila, there's 2 areas. One is called Makati, which is like LA. It's very new and fast. And then there was one like called Malate, which is like New York. It's like very cultured, laid back. So, and those are relatively close areas. So I would spend more time in Makati area, where a lot of the guys from the rival schools would be. And there had been some of the guys that I trained with that had been attacked in bars and, had been attacked outside of bars and terrible stories. Probably 3 weeks before I left, the Hoist purple belt was at a club that I was at with his cousin. I was there with my cousin earlier and we left. That guy with his cousin, when they were leaving, one of the guys from the rival group shot him and killed his cousin. Jeez. Like the same night I was there. Like, so the purple belt got shot, he lived. And then the other guy, his cousin, died that night. Like, and I was in the same club and the same people disliked me that disliked him. I mean, and
is this all because you trained a different place? Is that?
I think it's because everyone wants to be the toughest guy, right? So they want everyone to think that they're the toughest. So they would jump some of our guys in a bar, like 10 or 12 guys would like they'll stagger themselves throughout the bar. And then if my guy's in the back, one guy will attack him. And then when my guy chases that one guy, like 10 guys will hit him from the side while he's running. Fortunately, like that one guy, his name's Vico, like he got out of there. He might've broken his finger or something, but he took some people out in the process. He was a tough guy. Then, there was another guy who, he might've gotten like abducted. Like they're crazy stories, right? Like, and
crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazier than I anticipated.
Yeah, and going back and knowing this, I knew this at the time, but also when we're young and when we're training, right? Like we think we're invincible, until that last 3 weeks when I heard that guy got shot.
Yeah,
like, that's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, and I feel bad for the the guy's no longer with Hoist. He's married, has kids. Like we all grow up at some point, right? Like, and he's Black Belt Academy. He was under Salo at some point. We never had any beef, but I called wanting to train with him, and they said that they didn't want, they wouldn't give me the time of day. And then when I trained with Miles and Mike Vives, like those guys were studs. In my opinion, they were the best, and they're willing to prove it. Like we would always say, hey, if you guys want to compete against us, we'll put something together. And the only people that ever wanted to compete against us were the Philippine judo team. So we did like a submission match between Philippine national judo team before, which was pretty cool that they did it. And then, so Mark Vives is very big now, right? In the fight, like all that stuff, right? Like, so Mark was the last one to train jiu-jitsu, right? And Mark's the biggest one into it now. And they were, I think, the first non-Brazilian 3 brothers to become BJJ black belts, which is pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it is very cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, but
So
it was.
did you do stand up there, or where
I
did you?
did. So I trained Muay Thai with Miles,
Okay,
and a
that's what I thought.
little bit with his brother Mike. Mike was more into teaching jujitsu, and they're both became stud purple belts during my time there. And it's, we brought other people in there. Like Carlson Senior had come out there because we were under Carlson. We actually brought Roy Harris out because Roy was big into Filipino stick fighting and knife fighting. So Roy came for 3 weeks. At that point, I was a blue, I was promoted to blue belt in the summer of '99. So after my second year med school, I was attending review courses in Southern California, and that was like training, that was nonstop training for me. So I attended these review courses in the daytime, and at night I would take a bus to go all over. I didn't have a car, like go all over Southern California to train. And Butch, I know you and Ashley were talking about some of the VHS tapes. Like one was the Pedro Carvalho series, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Gracie Academy guys put out the basics and the intermediates, and they were like everything that people wanted. And then they kept people wanting more, and no one would put anything out. And then Pedro Carvalho came here from Brazil. I think he was under Marcelo Bering, and then he hooked up with Paul Vielle, and they put out more advanced techniques than what the Gracie Academy guys were releasing. So that was in Southern California. So I actually went to Pedro's and got to train there even before that summer. So I got to train at his place in Rancho Cucamonga, maybe in '97 and '98, like on vacation. And then in summer '99, I got to train there a little bit. And then I got to train at Rodrigo Medeiros' place, who's a Carlson guy. So it's not Comprito, it's the other Rodrigo, the Carlson guy. And Batiste Mansouri. So Batiste with Javi Vasquez and Romy Aram. So they're the millennia guys. And and it's more convenient for me to train with those guys in Upland than some of the other places. So I was promoted to blue belt by Batiste that summer. And one of the funny things was I competed at the Copa Pacifica that year, right?
Oh, they got the VHS tapes. I have all those Copa Pacific.
Yeah, I think this is Copa number 7.
Yeah.
And this before I was promoted, and it was like a huge white belt tournament, like 32 people or maybe more. And I think I won my first one. I lost my second one, and then in the consolation, I think I won one and lost one. And man, it was everybody, because Kleber is a Hickson, Kleber Luciano is a Hickson Gracie black belt. So I saw Hickson Gracie there, and I had just trained at bus trip to Hajer Machado's and all these places. So I was like, hey guys, can I get a picture? And John Machado was like the best looking brother, like everybody, like he's the model looking brother, right? And I got with Hickson and some of the other brothers there. And when I put my arms around him like this, I knocked Hickson's hat off his head. And I looked at him and I caught his hat like this. And then I started to put it back on his head. And John Machado said, "Don't do that, my friend." And I left it there, and Hickson fixed his own hat. And they still took the picture with me, but I think that I was like this close to getting killed by Hickson Gracie for first by knocking his hat off his head accidentally, and then by trying to putting a hat on a grown man, probably not the most masculine thing for me to do to him, right? So John Machado kind of saved my life that day, Copa.
Well, that's crazy though. What do you think of that, Gary? That's some wild background story, huh?
Well, I mean, that's actually better than any of those. Like you talk about gym storming, that's as good as any of those Helson stories where him and Henzo were running around in Brazil, and they'd be like into a big street fight with 12 guys from their academy and 12 guys from the Lucha Libre guys. Like, I mean, that's what it sounds like. It's like you guys are going clubbing and hey, you looked at my girl, and now we're gonna fight.
But it was all pretty one-sided though, right? Because our guys weren't doing that stuff, right? But our guys could fight. Like I mentioned, that one guy, Vico Perrine is an Arnis instructor, and he's a kickboxer. And like those guys, I think they might have broken one of his fingers when they were fighting inside the bar. Then when he ran out, he got hit a couple times, but he got some people. One of the toughest guys I know, right? The cool thing about that, the cool thing about that Copa Pacifica was, and you'll hear Eddie Bravo talk about that event, was he was a purple belt and Javi Vasquez was a purple belt. And in Eddie Bravo's Twister video, he shows that match where he loses to Javi. because it is such a good technical jiu-jitsu match. And that's the only match on the Twister video where Eddie loses, right? So I was there and I saw that match. And that's when, I mean, Hickson's kids were still, I think, orange and yellow belts. So I actually got to see Hoxton, I think, as an orange belt, and then and Crone, I think, as a yellow belt. And I think I even have maybe even I had a VHS, I think I videotaped them on VHS tape, competing. And then I think I even got pictures of them hugging it was, knowing now, that he lost his son, pretty awesome to be there at that event.
No, and that was beautiful. On the Joe Rogan last podcast with Hickson, right, where he asked him if there's anything that he regretted or something that he wished he could have fought. He mentioned Sakuraba and why the fight didn't happen, and that's what people forget, that he lost his son. And you can see his son in the documentary, the Choke video, right? And there's probably people out there that are like, internet trolls. I think that's bullshit, but.
Man, I mean, like you said, you lost your parents. I mean, when you lose someone close to you, there's nothing like that. You don't wish that pain on anybody. I'm sure Sakuraba understood if he knew. There's no way Sakuraba would have wanted that.
Absolutely, and all of us, we wish we would have saw that fight. But I don't regret not seeing that fight.
No, I wouldn't want Hickson to fight Sakuraba at that time. No.
Yeah, and. Yeah, it just makes me think of how hard his life. Listen, I haven't read his book, or I did buy the audiobook to listen to, and I don't know if there's something about Hoxton in there, but listen, man, that's got to be. We kind of brush over that because we're in it for jiu-jitsu and that rightfully so, right? But man, I can't imagine. That's a legend in our sport, just like the stories that you just said. That guy, you can't really brush over jiu-jitsu without mentioning Rickson Gracie and the fact that he went
best.
And you got to see his family. That is the one guy that I wish, I've missed a couple opportunities at some seminars that weren't too far away.
Sure.
And hopefully I get another opportunity before he's gone. I was lucky enough to train with Elio, when he was 94.
Yep.
And I would do the same with Rickson. Hopefully, he's still around in the 90s and rolling it. It's just the fact that we can train with a legend or see a legend just to be around that guy. And by the time that he's going to be old, he's old now, but I mean, super old, people are going to forget that he
was the man.
Yeah. And I mean, even in that podcast, I still don't think they gave him just due because, I mean, they mentioned it, but every person that we know of, Saulo Ribeiro, multiple time world champion, he will tell you, when I was the king of the mountain, I rolled with him, and it was I didn't know what I was doing.
So I mean, I think in Joe's podcast, Joe said that when Fabio Gurgel, who was super heavyweight world champion, right, says that Rickson schooled him, he's never been beaten as bad as he has been by Rickson. And remember, Fabio Gurgel is Marcelo Garcia's instructor, right? So for Fabio Gurgel to say that no one has beaten him as bad as Rickson, that is meaningful. And then also, there was, for a while, Nino Schembri was the toughest guy in jiu-jitsu, right?
God, right?
Yeah, and he also, I don't think he's from Rickson's team, but I think at some point he was allowed to train with Rickson, and he came back saying nothing but good things about Rickson. And Schembri was tearing up the jiu-jitsu world at that time, right? Yeah. So, and as far as opportunities to roll, my biggest piece of advice that I give all of the jiu-jitsu guys is, this is a marathon. When we first start, we want to go as hard as we can, as fast as we can. I tell people, train like you're 50 when you're 20, so you can train like you're 20 when you're 50. So Rickson and Ricardo Laborio from American Top Team, they're regarded by the two sides of the Gracie family as the two best ever, right? All the Carlson guys will swear that Laborio is better. Although they may have never even rolled with Rickson, Vitor and Cunanan, all the guys from Carlson's team, Murlo Bustamante, they all say Laborio, but I don't know if they've rolled with Rickson, right? So, but we do know that Fabio Gurgel, who's multiple-time world champion, has rolled with Rickson. And the thing that Laborio and Rickson have in common is they have severe arthritis in their spine. I think Laborio might even have fusion in his neck. So my understanding is neither one of them can roll anymore. So what happened was these guys for 30 years would let people come into their gym, 300-pound wrestlers, and stack them and crush them, right? Like, it's very cool to tap a bigger opponent, right, when you're smaller, right? I think, Gary, you were talking about in your podcast with Ashley, like, jiu-jitsu is empowering to the little man because it allows them to feel strong, right, and feel powerful. And for the big man, it can be humbling. And those wonderful words, right? And that's what we do. We want to be able to beat a bigger opponent from our back. The problem is when you do that enough, like, you wear out your back and neck. And that's what I believe Laborio can't roll anymore. And I believe they say it's very troubling for Hickson to roll now, or he might not even roll anymore. So I don't know, because does that sound familiar? Have you heard something like that?
So, yeah, for both of them.
I think, yeah.
He actually even said he enjoyed his life because he's learning how to be an old man now, like walk his dog, and right. He sounded like he was very labored. I've heard the same with Laborio, and I know that I think even Laborio's match with Mario Sperry in ADCC was kind of a stretch. Like, he had to get out there and do it, and it was. I think they had personal problems, is why that he actually did that match. You know?
Okay.
Yeah, there's some. I've got some inside story on a
Yeah.
of other stuff that I'm not going to go into because it might be secret. But
Sure.
yeah, hearing why that match happened with the ADCC guys is there's a lot of stuff with ADCC that's crazy. You know,
Is that the split from Brazilian top team to American top team? Is that when they split?
yeah, it had something to do with that, and it had something to do with money too. I think Mario had did some things that ADCC was angry about, and they kind of made that match happen. But to a degree, though, I think the public had wanted to see it. But
sure.
Also, I would argue it's like when we watched Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao.
It was 5 years late. 5 years.
Yeah, I think the same with that match, right? Mario Sperry was. Speaking of Paul Vieli, like, he made the Mario Sperry tapes, right? And those Mario Sperry tapes were amazing.
Gold. Yeah, that's Phil's like, if Phil could attend a seminar from anybody, that's what he would like to attend. Mario Sperry seminar. That's his favorite.
And I think Phil probably he and I probably came from that same club. We watched those things. We watched him, and he was amazing. Yeah. And he's a pressure passer, and he's a pressure gamer, and that's probably what Phil and I are. And and that's also, going back to what we were saying before. That's why Steph and I are such good friends, because Stefan was groomed to beat those guys up. He was the new generation, right? Like, so when Carlson's left those guys, or they left him, he wanted to make the new American guys, which was going to be Stephan Bonner, and Stephan Bonner was going to beat up Mario Sperry and all those guys, Vitor Belfort. That he was the American Psycho. It never came to be for different reasons, right? But it's cool because, and again, I think that's one of the things that Steph and I had in common, right? Like, because ultimately, I'm under Marcelo Monteiro, who's under De La Riva, who's under Carlson Gracie. We're the same team. But Stefan didn't know, because I was one of those people that traded all those tapes and have that. And I was like, you're the guy. Like, you were the guy. Like, he was like, how'd you know that? I was like, we all knew. Like, people that were in the tape thing, knew. I followed your career because, I don't really care if you beat them, because I like those guys. Mario Sperry is my hero, and I love Vitor Belfort and all those guys. And I mean, remember they called him Victor Gracie.
Gracie when he first started, yeah.
So it was like, but I knew I was in that little era, so I was kind of watching him, and then to see him pop up in the Ultimate Fighter, and I knew his history, so I was like, I felt proud. You know how it is, like we Gary and I talked about this before, like, you'd feel proud almost. You take ownership of people, like when you're the only one that knows him.
When you know them, yeah.
Stefan was that guy for me. I was like, I know that guy. Like, he's going to be the guy. And, so I followed him. And then so it was weird anyway, then now, I can share that stuff with him, and he finds it interesting because nobody else remembers except for hardcore jiu-jitsu guys. And then, of course, we're cut from the same cloth, and it's, I would say cut from the same cloth just by team-wise and jiu-jitsu-wise, not, fighter-wise, because he's the man and I'm nobody, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Sure.
So it is amazing. But honestly, actually, after that story, I don't know if Gary, if you're right, I don't know if there's a better way to end that. That was pretty.
I think that's good. I actually got to get off of here. I've got to get ready for bed. I got work in the morning. So.
No, but I think that we would put a downer on it if I mentioned the next two. So maybe we can go to the next. I think that was a beautiful story that enlightened me. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of good to come from that. So I think
we can do this again sometime. What do you think?
That's what I'm thinking.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope
Those 3
so.
hours just blew by like it was nothing. And I feel like, again, like all of us are akin to each other, learning stuff about each other. And it's a beautiful thing, man. I appreciate it.
thank you guys for having me. I appreciate sharing my experiences with you guys, and I appreciate you guys being part of, the West Virginia and local martial arts history here. Because we're not doing this because we're making a fortune off it, right? This is what we love to do.
Yeah.
Right. So
We're all still poor, right?
and I mean, if
Jiu-jitsu.
anything, if anything, we're probably losing money. Like, we could be doing something with our time to make more than what we're doing
Absolutely.
with what we're doing now.
Yeah.
But we do this
Well,
because we want to keep this going, right?
yeah. Well, and like being, I'm not too much younger than you guys, but I am the second wave of that, right? Like I started, you guys really started it. We talked about it with Ashley last time. If it weren't for you guys doing what you guys were doing, then a lot of us wouldn't have jujitsu. If it wasn't for Ashley and Butch and guys like you, Don, who were kind of at the forefront, laying the foundation of jiu-jitsu in West Virginia and southeastern Ohio area, like the Ohio Valley area. We wouldn't have competitions that we had. We wouldn't have a lot of the jiu-jitsu knowledge that we had. And these conversations are good for me because like it's important to know that like I kind of had it. I have it harder than a lot of the guys that had that I'm training. Man, I had it pretty easy. And so for me to sit here, like, listen to you guys, like, oh no, yeah, when we got a blue belt in town, that was the shit. And it was the end of the world for us because like, getting somebody who knew something around was amazing. And, we take it for granted a little bit how available jiu-jitsu was to us. So thank you guys.
Well, thank you, Don. It was a pleasure. It's not often we do it's actually never that we did a podcast that Misha Tate's mom jumped on too. So that's great. So she must think you're awesome, Don. I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. That's 3 hours of solid jiu-jitsu history. Thank you. Let's let Gary get to work and we'll get this up, man. I appreciate it, man. You guys
I appreciate your time. Thank you guys.
All right.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Butch. Guys, take it easy.
All right.
All right. See you, man.